meetings are open to the public. Community members are welcome to observe all planning commission briefings and work sessions. We welcome public comment on those topics for which a public hearing has not been held. My name is Derek Day. I serve as the commission chair and reside in District 1. We will continue our introductions here in the boardroom and then we will go to the Zoom. Starting with Commissioner Bartlett.
My son is he, him, and I'm one of the representatives for District 5. I live in Tumwater.
Kevin Passinger, pronouns are he, him, I'm in District 5.
Daniel Baumbarker, he, him. I both live in and serve for District 1.
Barry Halverson, District 2.
Eric Casino, I serve at large, but I live in the Lacey UGA.
Scott Nelson, District 4.
All right, then we've got one commissioner online, looks like.
Joel Hanson serving District 3.
Thank you, Joel. All right. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve our agenda. Any discussion?
Just a friendly request that this is like 3 hours and 5-minute agenda. There's new records here. I respectfully request shorter meetings.
That's why it's called a special meeting.
Yeah.
It is partially in our hands. All right, with that. Did we get a second? We moved it in second, right?
Moved it.
Okay.
For discussion.
Oh, okay. I jumped the gun. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, now that it's actually moved and seconded, I assume we have no further discussion. All right, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the agenda is approved. Next, moving on to meeting minutes.
Move to approve the meeting minutes and accept the audio as the official meeting record.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, with no discussion, call for the vote. All in favor, approving the meeting minutes and accepting the audio as the official record?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion, any opposed? That motion passes. All right, moving on to item number 3, we have public communications and staff have provided me with the script, which I will read. The Thurston County Planning Commission welcomes comments from the public at all meetings. However, there are some guidelines governing such comments to ensure that they are appropriate and do not take advantage of the fact that most meetings are televised. General speaking guidelines include please introduce yourself, including your address where you reside in the county. Please address the Planning Commission, not the audience or staff. Please silence our cell phones. The Planning Commission does not respond to public comments. Speakers are limited to a total of 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission. The timer will show on one of the video screens to help keep track of time. Meeting attendees cannot donate their speaking time to another commenter. No comments that are lewd, offensive, inflammatory, hateful, defamatory, or discriminatory in nature. Please be respectful. No outbursts of any kind, and no comments that are commercial in nature, such as the promotion of for-profit businesses. And all materials provided to the county may be considered public records, subject to public release upon request pursuant to the Public Records Act. And remarks on projects that have already had a public hearing are not permitted. So thank you for your participation. We'll start here in the boardroom today. We've got 2 people signed up. Is there anybody else who'd like to give comment? All right, we will start here in the boardroom with Ms. Betsy Norton.
Thank you. My name is Betsy Norton. I live in Park Drive, Southwest in Olympia, and I'm here to represent Black Hills Audubon Society Conservation Committee.
I'd just like to comment on the scoping for the EIS. And I have a written statement, I'll just summarize it here. We'd like you to include several things in the scope for the EIS. First one is to please include assessing wildlife habitat impact and loss and offer options for minimizing this loss by 2045 with a focus on these specific habitats of importance: legacy forests, Oregon white oak prairies, spawning streams and tributaries, wetlands and water bodies, particularly habitat for Oregon spotted frog. Number two, please include assessing biodiversity of plant and animal species in the county and provide guidance for minimizing that loss of diversity by 2045. Number three, please assess the likely impact of the Thurston County HCP on the 4 listed species by 2045. Our concern, given progress to date, is that if developers destroy habitat faster than the county can provide appropriate restored mitigation land, species loss may not be sufficiently mitigated. Number four, given the increasing challenges of water quality and quantity, what is the estimated impact on wetlands, streams, and lakes by 2045 if no significant change is made in county zoning policies, standards, and codes? Number five, please include evaluation of how the dual goals of implementing renewable energy and protecting wildlife can coexist. And we have a few suggestions. Number six, please include an evaluation of whether and how an east-west wildlife corridor can be obtained in Thurston County, and the various alternatives to accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll email.
That was an exceptionally dense public comment. You guys really got it in there. You had
Very-
time left.
Very efficient.
I'm very impressed. Yeah. All right, Mr. Pettit, you're next.
My name is John Pettit. I live at 9725 Ridge Road, Southeast Olympia. And I have waterfront along the Deschutes River that I certainly want to see the access for the public to enjoy access points to the river and everything. In the future, you'll probably, hopefully, Thurston County will start generating a thought that we need to develop some parks, that are located out there before the best available properties are gone. And we need to make sure we have a park program in place. And at that point, you guys, of course, will be doing your consideration, but that also ties in with some of the Audubon societies and everyone's concerns, is because it's where we live. And we can't depend upon just the state or federal government to create these rules over the top of us that we're going to suddenly adapt everything. But for tonight, I guess I want to wish you all eat some cookies. So I feel like I've accomplished something by bringing you some cookies here tonight. Most important, just general statement here. While I'll have a project coming up in the future from one of my clients to try to encourage positive things, I'm not too concerned, because this group of people, you seem to be pretty well level-headed with the idea that balance in our society and our place is what's important, which includes both opportunity to enjoy the environment we have, but also business enterprise that provides a means for people to make a living and support the services that we're looking at. And I realize that if I had one complaint, I guess I'm gonna have to go to work on the commissioners, is that at least they should be supplying you guys with a little bit more benefit. I mean, I realize you get highly paid for the work you do and the time and energy, but which is nothing, for the record, for the public. But you do provide a valuable service to the community. And that means you're stepping up, you're using your time. Something you can't replace, you're using your time. So thank you for that. And I'll continue to be looking forward to be potentially an access point for information on various topics that might come up that I have some expertise on: real estate development, environmental aspects, and such as waterfronts, and I'd be happy to help. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. All right, next, do we have anybody online who would like to provide public comment? And if you do, please raise your hand. All right, sounds like we're good to move on. We have no new business, but we have plenty of continued business. An hour or 3 hours and 15 minutes. So we're moving on next to work session number 4 for the less restrictive alternative housing code update. Is that, sorry, what? Oh, I missed it, sorry, I skipped the number 4. And it is the general Thurston 2045 update.
I'm very excited Miriam with me tonight, but her child is a soccer game, so that's why we're bumping the the top of the agenda, just in case it ended up at the 3rd hour of the agenda. So, yeah, Miriam, I'm gonna turn it over to
No way.
you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Miriam Biasian, Senior Planner for Public Engagement. I'm just gonna give you an update on some of the public engagement we're doing for the comprehensive plan and in general, community planning. We're kind of not necessarily talking about just one thing when they're out there in the community. So we did have our 2 forums recently, one in Yelm and one in Tenino. And it was a few hours of food and sitting around with the community and having really great conversations with the community members of Yelm and Tenino. We had some of our planning staff, we had our consultants with us. And then we had, I think for Yelm, we had about close to 20 people come, and I think Tenino was a little smaller one. It was a harder ask to get out there.
But
Yep,
Betsy
Betsy
made
was
it.
there. Yep, so we had probably like 8 there, I think, 8 to 10 there. But we heard similar things that we've been hearing out in the community with your concerns about the economy, cost of living, increasing property taxes, clean water and water availability. In these rural areas, we're hearing more about making sure agriculture has water rights. So there's a little more specific ask that they're talking about innovative solutions needed for alternative energies, and also the idea of as we're electrifying fleets and things like that, more structure needed for the rural communities, and more understanding that not necessarily everybody can afford the cost and upkeep of an electric vehicle. There in Yelm specifically, they were talking about needing all levels of housing in Yelm and needing that transitional housing as well. They discussed that there wasn't a need for industrial lands in and around Yelm, so that was one of the things they talked about. And Yelm specifically too, they're talking about traffic and how we're developing without addressing the infrastructure for traffic, especially when issues happen on I-5, everybody gets reverted down into Yelm, and then it causes 3-hour backups down that main strip. So that's one of the things we talked about a lot there.
I think Commissioner Bartlett.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify what you meant by transitional housing.
So basically like all levels, like, you know, you have your first house that you bought, you know, as maybe a young couple or whatever, and being able to move out of that house to the next up, so that house gets freed up for the next kind of, that's what they were talking about. I know that there's other definitions for transitional housing, but that's what they were talking about specifically. Thank you for that clarification. They talked a lot about wanting choices for their property, so focusing on incentives rather than mandates, understanding that the rural community often made a choice to live rurally, so they want to keep it that way. They moved all the way out there 20 to 40 minutes from anything for a reason, and so they're hoping to kind of keep it that way. And I thought one of the great things was they really appreciated that format of that community conversation, because it really did feel like sharing a meal with somebody and having conversations with both us as staff and also each other as community members. And that was one of the things that stood out to me, as we had, I know at the table that I was at, just like lots of different people with kind of different viewpoints in life, but just kind of having a civil conversation about the future of their community. And it was really impactful, I think, for some of the people that were attending there. So thinking for us in the future, as we do more of these public engagement things, how we can kind of continue to have conversations like that and not necessarily just have the, here's our poster board and I'm gonna talk as a subject matter expert, but really have these kind of like back and forth conversations with people that we thought were valuable. So that was the forums. I will be kind of writing up a more formal report from what we heard and sending that out to the people that attended, because that was one of the other things we heard is as community members, they're spending their time and giving us feedback and they want to know how that feedback is being used. And sometimes we'll send, this is what we heard from you, but really making sure we take that further step. This is what we heard from you, and this is the changes we made in whether it be the comprehensive plan or code update or anything like that. And this is how it was used. I think people are really wanting that, that feedback so that they feel that their time was valued. Event season has started. Oh, one of the things, do we want to talk about Commissioner Fishburne's feedback too?
Yeah, so we were fortunate to have both Commissioners Fishburne and Commissioner Halverson come to the Yelm meeting, and although Commissioner Fishburne couldn't be here tonight, I know you missed out on most of the activity. But he got to help,
I got
like,
to help you clean up.
you got to help clean up and hear us all reflect on everything we heard. Hopefully you got that sense of energy. We were all really excited. It was a very positive atmosphere. But Commissioner Fishburne actually sent his reflections and he said it would be okay if we shared them. I thought they were very insightful and he kind of moved around to different tables to hear as much of the conversation as he could.
Yeah. So his feedback, what he heard, and I'm just gonna read this because this was his word. So rural residents think of themselves as much different from suburban residents. He said that he, you know, as he went to different tables, he actually heard that from a few different people and tables. And basically they believe they might need different services than some suburban residents as being rural residents. They also want the same or similar services, so parks and more or better utilities, trails, but they're also concerned about the taxes and paying for those services as well. Some of the people alluded to that a 20-year plan might not be long enough. And so this got him thinking about how different the comprehensive plan might look if we start looking at the seven generations perspective as much as possible while we're still working on this comprehensive plan update. He mentioned that there were kind of two distinct trains of thought that became evident to him. So why do I need to be told what to do and how to do it? And why isn't the county doing more to protect my interests? And so sometimes those trains of thought were mentioned by the same people. And so how do we deal with that kind of contradiction of thought? So those were some really interesting insights that we got from him. So event season is here. We're in the swing of it already. We've already gone to a couple of events. Some of the events are repeats from last year. And last year was kind of our first, I mean, after COVID and all of that, last year was really the first year we really got back into being out in the community. And so this year is kind of our second year. And what has been cool to me is one of my events I went to last year was the Cielo event, the Dia de la Familia. We went again this year, had an interpreter again this year, but I was able to see some of the same people and families that I saw last year and reconnect with them and be like, oh yeah, remember we talked about this and this was your feedback. And this is where we are now in the comprehensive plan update and how your feedback is being used. And so I think that now that I'm seeing that happening, you know, that's really valuable. That we'll be able to kind of they'll start seeing our faces more and more. We have all of our planning staff now out there, which is really great. Everybody's kind of taking a turn and going to some community events. So our community members have a chance to meet them. They have a chance to meet our community. So we are out there more and more. You guys do have, we have most of our events that we're going to be attending. If you go to thurstonplanning.org and go to find a meeting, that Google Calendar has the events that we're going to. And we populate it because sometimes people don't advertise their events like till like a month before the event. So sometimes I'm like scrambling to even find when the date is and then find out how to get into it. But we'll be this Sunday at the All-American Jubilee in Rainier. So my daughter and I, the 8-year-old that you saw last time, she's gonna help me. She's super excited. She loves the events. So
And where were we today? Cause I think our
and
team.
we were at, yep, and our team today was at the Nisqually summer kickoff. It's a new event for the Nisqually tribe. Last year we did the Nisqually Pride and Health Fair. They're not doing it this year. They were doing that one instead. And so we had a couple team members go there and
And they said they clocked 92 people.
yeah.
And if you compare that with how many, I mean, we had lovely conversations at the forums that we held, but the difference between being able to reach 92 people and just let them
Right.
know who we are and what we're doing versus the people who can actually take out, you know, however many hours of their day to come spend with us. So we're
And
hoping.
And it took, I don't know, an hour and a half to set up for going to the event today. We have our go boxes ready to go. It's, you know, a lot less work for a lot more impact, I think, when we're out there in the community versus throwing our own parties.
Although I will say, even for throwing around parties, we had people show up that have never been to a public meeting before. And in
Yeah.
particular, we had a mother and her son who's in college attend to just kind of see what it was like, because he
Mhm.
wants to get into civil engineering. And to just be able to like, yes, you could do that, you could be a part of this. So, you know, it was very
Yeah.
touching.
Yeah,
but-
that was really great. We told them to look into stormwater because it's so niche, there's so much opportunity.
Commissioner.
There's money in stormwater.
Yeah, yeah, and more is needed. So, yeah, so you're welcome to come to any of the events. We'd love to see you there. You know, come say hi. You can come table the event with us for a little while, you know, hand out the flyers.
If you have any children or grandchildren that want to tag along, they're a huge help.
Yep, the events are usually pretty fun. So, yeah, so I do not need that entire hour that's on that agenda. That's about it for me, unless you guys have some questions or suggestions. You know, we have a whole list of events. You guys have been great about giving us events to go check out, so we're trying to add those to the calendar where we can.
Just really quick, where on the website did you say that was?
If you go to it, I think it's on Thurston 2040, or sorry, not Thurston 2045. It's on thurstonplanning.org. And if you scroll down a little bit, there's a few little icons and one of them says find a meeting, and it should be like a Google Calendar.
Oh, thank you.
Commissioner Helmer.
Yeah, I'm just gonna give a shout out to the Yelm City Council and the changes that they've made in their zoning codes within the city limits. I don't know if you had a chance to see some of that out there, but over the last 5 years, they built a couple apartment complexes. They've also changed the zoning codes for some of the areas to allow, there's a 50-unit housing development going in by the fire station on Mill Road right now that has what they call detached ADUs and attached ADUs. Literally 15 feet from the house in front, that's a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 1,400 square feet, to 12 feet behind it is a 1,000 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, with the driveway that goes beside the other house. So they're able to put 50 units on a lot, or about 12 acres, okay, with this zoning change that they put in. And this company, Rush Residential, is the one that's building this particular series of homes, and they're all rentals. Because there's a big need for rentals right now because people can't afford to buy. And I was surprised to find out that the 1,000 square foot home, the ADU unit, they're looking at putting on the market at $2,300 a month.
Oh, my goodness.
It includes some utility, yeah. It includes some utilities, and some internet access up to a certain level. And beyond that, the people have to increase their internet speeds, et cetera. The houses in front that are about 1,400 square feet or about 2,600 to 2,700 a month is rentals. And the ADUs up front, they're like I refer to them as the Virginia homes that you have that are like right next door, like sandwiches, and they got 6 or 8 of them in a row. Not even condominiums, they're
Like a townhome?
like a
or
townhouse.
brownstone?
Yeah. And so they've got the main house on one side and the ADU, attached ADU on the other. So they're really kind of jamming them in. I talked to the owner of the Rush Group this afternoon. I asked him to send me some architectural floor plans for these particular units that I'll send to you as soon as I get them. So at least we can take a look at it, because I asked him, where else are these being done in Thurston County? He said nowhere. He says, we've got one other place like this up in Gig Harbor that we've completed building. And they were very successful in that particular lot. But Thurston County is only the second one where this has been done, and it's in Yelm, Washington. So it may be something that we want to look at when we talk about to other communities and stuff about how they can maybe change some of their zoning codes and stuff to allow these type of units. I didn't find that these units were particularly cheap. Reasonable in that regard.
And I know it'll be touched on later in Burke's presentation on housing, but we were fortunate enough to have a realtor attend the Yelm open house. And we were asking her what she sees, because she mostly focuses on rural properties in terms of what kind of housing is out there that is unpermitted. And there's a lot. I mean, she was telling us quite a few stories. But yeah, it's the unseen, unsheltered, or I guess, I don't even know provisional. I don't know what the right terminology is.
So they're popping up ADUs on properties, unpermitted, like you said, in the rural area to
Or
house
RVs.
children and parents, etc. It's so expensive for them to get permits for them. And so they're just doing it. And that kid got some problems, because I've seen a couple of them, they're tying into their existing septic systems. But yeah, that's probably what she's referring to.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You can tell how much like passion you have for this. So,
It's been great to connect with the community. I definitely believe that they should be involved in their local government.
and it shows.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I got a soccer game to go to.
Yeah.
Part of Miriam will now be.
Andrew, you got a lot to live up to.
Well, luckily there are two. Yeah, the other you could help from. It's on Zoom.
The Zoom
Oh,
version.
All right. Moving on to work session item number 5 on our agenda, work session 4 for the less restrictive alternative housing code update for real estate.
While she's getting loaded, I did want to note that we have added a slide. We'll make sure it's updated on the website. We are waiting for information from a prosecuting attorney, and so that's why it was not sent out.
Sorry, Andrew's pulling it up because I will have to be doing other things pertinent to this on my computer, so we're many screening it. But hi, everyone, again, Ann Rodriguez. This is the 4th, hopefully final, work session on LRA community housing. So not necessarily much to discuss, kind of following up on things from last time, potentially formalizing some recommendations for the board, and then talking about the next steps and timeline. Just to backtrack kind of to what we discussed day one when we first brought this to the planning commission, I know that there was a lot of, from the public comment we received and then testimony during the public hearing, it got a little bit confusing last time. And so I just wanted to clarify where we're at just for everyone and also the record as well, before moving forward and talking about recommendations you all made last time. there's different types of facilities, so McNeil Island, which we all know, Special Commitment Center, that's it. Different from LRA, so those who are residents of McNeil Island can petition when they have completed their sentence to relocate to a less restrictive alternative. And so there's secure community transition facilities, which are those that are state-run, DSHS operates those facilities, and we already have those provisions in our code. We're focusing on the private provider, less restrictive alternative, and so it is different from a sex offender treatment facility because they will not be receiving treatment in the facility. It's very cloudy and weird. It's a residential space where they will exist and they will receive treatment elsewhere. And this is the proposed code update that we're discussing.
And I think that where the confusion came in is that the state uses LRA. It applies to like at least 3 different things. So we just wanted to clarify the thing that we're focused on.
I kind of want to be a stickler on this one because definitionally, when we look at the RCW, which is 7109-020, number 7, it says a less restrictive alternative community housing means a residence used to house people for court-ordered treatment. So definitionally, it does have treatment.
Well, it could be their housing for people who have court-ordered treatment, but it might not include their treatment.
Yeah, that's an important
Is that
distinction.
I think I think I understand. It's for sex offenders under treatment, but the physical treatment isn't happening at the residence.
I would think that if the word was something like in treatment or getting treatment or something like that, that would be a reasonable conclusion. But since it says that it's for court-ordered treatment, the facility is for court-ordered treatment, I don't know how you get around saying that treatment doesn't happen on site.
So I don't think we can change the state's definition.
Well, that is the state's definition.
No, but in terms of, I just want to make sure we don't expend a lot of energy trying to interpret state law like we've been meeting with Travis after every planning commission meeting to really figure out like, what are the sideboards on this? And yeah, I just don't want to go down I don't know how effective it's going to be to go down too many rabbit holes. You're right. I don't think it's super clear. And they use the same definition as it applies to multiple facilities.
They do, but I mean, this is a very specific definition of a very specific term. And the concern that we've heard, not only from some planning commissioners, including me, but the vast majority of the public, when you say LRA community housing, and it doesn't say anything about what this really is. There's so much confusion about what that really is by not having anything in there about what this is for. Feels like it's hiding the ball. And I want to think in our second meeting, our first meeting, we asked, could we use a different term? And we said that in our first meeting. In our second meeting, he came back after talking to Travis and said that we can add something to it. We can't get rid of LRA altogether, but we can have a longer name that does include, so that way we are not hiding the ball. And I want to make sure that we continue to not hide the ball because LRA community housing totally obfuscates what this is.
Yeah, I would just suggest, I agree, we should put an addendum on that, so at least people understand. But it does sound like the name that we proposed, at least according to county legal staff, is a little fuzzy or misleading. I think if instead of calling it a treatment facility, you call it less restrictive alternative community housing for sex offenders in treatment, it accomplishes the same thing. It explains why they're there and what they're doing without stating that that particular facility is dedicated for treatment, which is the way the name is phrased now implies.
I switched since we're talking about title and it was
Yeah,
one
well,
of the
I
first
knew it was on
recommendations.
the
I
one
figured it
coming
would
up.
be helpful to bring it up on the slide just for those at home. That was the longer name that you all had proposed through a formal motion last time. Following up kind of on what you all are saying now, but also after talking with legal, it is a little more confusing and LRA community housing is already kind of vague as is, and this one also doesn't get at what these facilities are, and so there's that.
So what's the recommendation?
That's up to you all. If you would like, these are the recommendations you had. I just wanted to show them to you all because they were initial. We did not finalize the recommendation letter for the board just yet, and so this is an opportunity to remove, change, add as you see fit. I have provided motions to try and guide the conversation in a way that I think will be helpful just after following up with legal and trying to take it from a perspective of how can we, let me backtrack a little. You all will provide your recommendation and I have the letter, but in addition to the recommendation for this specific docket item, I will be writing up a little bit more of a specific report for the board to provide context on what was discussed in these work sessions and what legal has said. We're already scheduling with the prosecuting attorney's office and making sure that we're meeting with them in advance of meeting with the board and that they're looped in as the process goes along, because this is something that they should actively be a part of more so than say a regular rezone amendment. And so, as you probably have already seen, the motions are a little more vague, just because I'm trying to make sure that they're a catch-all for all of the different things you all may want included. And then more specific things that you all had discussed, like the follow-up questions for research that you provided me to follow up on for this. Those will be in the staff report as specifics as context for the board. Just a little bit of context. That being said, the recommendations and how you all wish to proceed is up to you all in discussion.
Commissioner Messenger?
I share Commissioner Casino's concerns about the misleading terminology and confusing terminology, and I think Commissioner Baumgartner suggested a good alternative, which I.
So I was thinking about this, sorry, direct response here. What about less restrictive alternative, state mandated residential facility for sex offenders in treatment? It changes very little of what's there. It just slightly rearranges it so it's clear that the facility isn't necessarily just for treatment.
I second this decision. Something that one of the reasons I think it's important to be clear about this being the not being where the active treatment is going is that clarifies who is going to be coming in and out of these regularly and what expectations people can have for that. You have just a very different staffing, very different expectations out of something that's an active treatment facility versus something that people are commuting to and from treatment for.
Yeah.
So I support this.
I agree, and I think it's useful for the public to know that this isn't a place where sex offenders are going to be stuck. Essentially, they will be leaving that facility for treatment, and they should be aware of that when they're informed that one of these facilities is coming into their neighborhood.
Do we know that?
It does, yeah.
Do
But
we know that they are?
there's
doing-
rules about them being cited within a certain distance to their providers in the code. So
Maybe I wasn't clear on my question. Do we know that these residents will go off-site for the treatment? How do we know that?
Legal consultation and their interpretation of the RCW and that the treatment facilities are elsewhere.
It's not because we've actually seen a business plan or anything like that, but legal has said that they are leaving the facility for treatment, even though the RCW says that this is for treatment.
DSHS's FAQ also outlines,
Have they?
yes. Because there's specific monitoring and as far as going from point A to point B, there's extensive planning that goes into that. It's not just like, it's a Wednesday and they have a
Yeah.
meeting with their corrections officer. There's a much more firm timeline and Department of Corrections is involved with that as well.
If that's the case, then I think Commissioner Baumgartner's
revised language.
yeah, would be appropriate.
So state mandated residential facility for sex offenders in treatment.
So this is on another slide, but it's relevant to now. This title and the title we were using, we went from LRA community housing to LRA state mandated sex offender.
Treatment facility.
Well, there was the one in between, sex offender housing, state mandated sex offender housing to this recommendation. After talking with legal, this is where it gets a little wonky in that we're trying to adhere to state law or to make sure that our code is up to date with the changes made in state law in the past couple of years. They feel as though using something other than LRA community housing, while I agree, it doesn't tell you what it actually is, it's what the state refers to it as, and so they feel as though deviating from the state's name for these facilities could cause confusion as well.
That's a change from
Don't agree.
earlier.
We've already discussed this and we were in agreement that we don't care.
Okay. My job in this is just telling you everything.
Yeah, no,
that
no,
I
no,
heard
we're
legal
fine.
On the
Yeah.
off chance that
Not
you all
directed at
said,
you.
never mind, let's just go back to the docket title.
I do think that, I'm glad you reported that, because it does provide some insight into what we can expect out of our recommendations, but,
Yeah, we've already made the comment that we want to know when it's gonna go before them for
Right,
things,
and
so we can go talk about it.
I think we might even wanna have some sort of statement from the planning commission that says that we believe that the state's definition does not provide the public with a clear picture of what this is.
It's necessary but not sufficient.
Do you want that in your recommendation letter?
Yep.
Like in terms of
wanna-
context for why?
Yes.
Yeah, and so when
I
they get
think
the
it
answer from
lends
legal,
impact.
it's like, oh, but if we change the language, it's not gonna be the same anymore.
It's not just us, it was the public comment too. Everyone was basically in favor of.
yeah, that's like the lowest common denominator of agreement. Is that,
We would
It's an
like to all
information
understand
thing. People
this.
need to understand what this is when it's proposed in their
I didn't
area.
know
So the code is a public document and wanting to ensure it's clear and transparent for all who are interfacing with it.
exactly.
Yeah,
Cause
I think-
honestly, that name's opaque,
Yeah,
the
it's
legal name.
probably woefully obtuse.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it is willfully obtuse. I think not necessarily all for bad reasons, but I disagree.
If there was a formal motion to come to this name, yes, motion to amend it again.
Yeah.
Override your
So,
motion from.
I would like to motion to change the title of our previous recommendation to less restrictive alternative state mandated residential facility for sex offenders in treatment.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous.
I have that written down, as well as the fact that the planning commission feels as though the definition in the RCW does not clearly and transparently describe what these facilities are and how they will operate.
And
Thank you.
requires a supplement.
I didn't know what it was until I opened my packet. So it's like, oh wait, that's not what I thought it was.
It's not part of the housing update?
Nope. Commissioner Pessinger.
I don't know if the plan is to continue going down this list of recommendations and what comments you have on that are, but I thought we maybe preceding some of this had a list of questions that were gonna be researched. Is that gonna be part of this?
It's going to be more broadly looped into the, just generally the, what is this slide, that if you would like, we can stick on the slide instead of look at the recommendations. I'm happy to jump around in whatever way is best for the planning commission.
Well, I just remembered a lot of confusion
Mhm.
about things like contracted or non-contracted and public comments that had come in about, you know, oh, somebody's doing this privately at their home with their sister or something like that. And, oh, it can be done under, you know, it can follow a bunch of rules and guidelines and policies and laws, or they could just make it up and do whatever they want. I mean, there was a lot of confusing statements that were made about limitations, size, notifications, rules that had to be followed, et cetera. And I think it would be helpful if we have answers to any of those. So we should-
Absolutely. I have answers to all of them. As far as facilities being uncontracted or contracted, in the current draft ordinance, we do have it state that they should be contracted with DSHS. That was something that we threw in there just because we felt that was best and that was okay as far as legal stance.
It should be like may or must.
They must provide their contract with their application for the special use permit.
As far as additional security measures and fencing, we cannot do more than what state law prescribes. Requiring that the facility report any violations to the county. There was that statement in RCW 71.09.092, section 2, about who all gets the reports on the violations. We could, but is that something that's truly a good use of time, because it would require the state to cooperate in a way that they likely wouldn't be able to?
I think it's worth asking.
And is it cause they have to report their own
They're all-
violations, right?
They already reported to a long list of people, cause I was the one who brought this up, and all I was saying is that if they're already preparing these alerts, they don't even have to share the substance of the alerts, but just inform the county that
Notify
these,
the county.
these violations have happened in there. That doesn't sound onerous, and it is not a restriction, it's just a requirement for communication, which the public has a right to know. That was my.
So I don't know if it's as much like asking that the state tell us when something has been violated, but a requirement for the operator.
The operator has to report to us.
Yeah, and probably the easiest way to actually address that is a condition of approval.
And if they agree it's a condition of approval to share that, then it's just a matter of,
Well, they don't necessarily, a condition of approval is a condition of approval.
oh, makes sense.
Could you put that condition on it, that decision?
I don't know if we can codify that they have to either.
I think you could codify it more easily than you could actually condition it.
If we codified it, but it's not specifically outlined in their either administrative code that they have to provide it, it would just be a request and they could just simply ignore that request. We're one of a few counties that are actually looking to do this. A few have, but there aren't this many facilities that exist in the state. And so it's kind of uncharted territory. So it would simply start as a request, and potentially if state law evolved or anything like that, it could evolve, but it does kind of live outside the zoning realm because we look at it from today's perspective. And that kind of goes into some of the optional motions where we could look at that kind of supplement compliance piece of it. So,
Okay, I understood it that our county code can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive of state law.
I would point to what Attorney General Bob Ferguson quotes are.
Point to anything Bob Ferguson said.
Well, I mean, there's,
I'm not being nasty,
Yeah.
actually. I'm just saying.
it's not the counsel we have received. Now, the planning commission, we're not saying that you can't adopt these motions or pass them on to the board. But we're here, like, we actually did see or requested a prosecuting attorney to come tonight so that we wouldn't necessarily be speaking on his behalf, but he had a prior
We'd be
engagement.
telling him the same thing.
And, but we just want to make sure that we're communicating what we're hearing and what the sideboards are.
We're communicating what the people of this county want. And that's
and
our
that's
job.
appropriate. No, and that's appropriate.
And quite frankly, we made all these motions the last time and they were all unanimous, as I recall. And I see no reason that they should change.
And I will say, you know, at the risk of, you know, interpreting statute without license, I don't think we're talking about, and I don't agree with the attorney at all on this. If this is what they're basing it on, like 0, because this is talking about attempts to restrict or prohibit. And those are not restrictions, those are not prohibitions, those are conditions that you're putting on a certain type of land use. And those, I believe, are all appropriate.
I don't think this is his only basis.
Okay.
Cause there's been case law as well. In addition to what's in the RCWs.
I would also like to point out that that comment is specific about the release of these individuals to the facilities. None of our commentary or rule or proposed rulemaking or code making has to do anything about the release of these people. It's just the safety and conditions of a business that is operating within the county. We're not saying they can't operate in the county. We're saying that if they operate, we should hold them to the same standard that we hold similar styles of businesses with plumbing and energy use and care, things like that. So it's not a categorical prohibition either, because we're pulling things from other areas and other categories. It's not unique to them.
Some of, if we go back to the other slides, some of those things would be. Oh, maybe it's not on there. There was, I remember there was discussion about being more proactive with code compliance, and that would be unique. We don't do that for any other uses.
Were these recommendations, the intent is to give them separately as individual options to the BOCC?
These ones are actually changes to titles 20 to 23. In terms of falling in that bucket, and I think the reason the other one isn't on there is it falls outside of the zoning and development code. And so the planning commission doesn't necessarily have the authority, but they can make recommendations to the board to look at opening up those other sections of code.
Yeah, I think, well, the fifth bullet on there is literally just copying RCW into our code, correct? It's not inventing something new, it's stating we should do the same thing that RCW 7109-020 has.
That one was the definition is about what a risk potential facility is. So yeah, it's just saying that.
Just
like,
copying it into code.
And if I'm remembering correctly, I don't believe it states that 500 feet of risk potential facilities in the code. I remember
Oh, the
Commissioner
500
Rufino bringing it up as being
Wow.
a recommendation just a little bit more because we were talking about the incident with a bus stop that was both a public transit stop and a school bus stop. And it was not flagged at an adequate point in time that it was also a school bus stop. And so there was a location that was in too close of a distance. And so I think that was brought up by the public at that
It
stage.
says for the purposes of this chapter, school bus stops does not include bus stops established primarily for public transit. But that wasn't my biggest concern. My biggest concern was that I wanted 500 feet from all risk potential facilities and not just 500 feet from K through 12s.
Well, I'm happy if you all would like to, if you don't want to change any of the recommendations that you provided last time. If you all would like to motion to just leave them as is, I do already have them in my document.
Second.
There are, well, I can't call the motion. One of you will have to call the motion.
Just did.
Okay, great. I missed that. I apologize.
My only concern, so forgive me, I'm still kind of new to this. Our recommendations will accompany the code update to the Board of County Commissioners. And they will receive our recommendations. Is the intent to give all of our recommendations as a single package? I personally think that some of the items that are less likely to receive pushback from the Board of County Commissioners should be proposed as individual items. That way the entire batch is not thrown out, simply
They don't throw out the entire batch.
they'll pick and choose. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
And
It's my first time
No, it's
doing
fine. And-
exactly this, so.
in Anna's, that proposal to write a slightly longer document that has context. We'll be writing that up for these as well. What we have been asked by county management is to make sure as this moves through to the board process to highlight the planning commission recommendation. What we've heard from legal so that they're fully aware of whatever decisions they're making and the impacts of those decisions. And then context.
And the fact that the planning commission heard what legal had to say and we don't agree with it.
Yeah, I think that's important
Good context.
for the staff. Just to make sure that you know that when this is passed on, like. They know that due process, that due diligence was made by staff to inform us, because you guys have been doing great on that, and.
I have a very detailed timeline that we include in this document. Of meetings and conversations.
Timestamps for mentioning, but legal said.
Our recommendations, will that include a summary of our reasoning for these?
We do provide the minutes from the description, and because of this topic and the sensitivity of each of the recommendations, the specificity of each, we will probably go into a background as to what it means, what legal has to say about it, and then kind of just like create the full picture and let them take that. And if they decide to go with it, they can go with it. If they don't, they don't.
If that drafting happens with a decent amount of lead time and could be shared with us beforehand so that we could point out potential nuance or points that may have been missed, that would be wonderful. And I personally would also like, now that we have officially moved, to change the name to not imply that this is a treatment facility. I would personally be interested, although it doesn't change my decision, how legal feels about it now. I know they don't like it being a different name, but it is not incorrect by their interpretation of that RCW now.
Commissioner Bartlett and then Commissioner Messina.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in the interests of making sure that, our interest, like, our reasoning is made clear, without having to dictate too much to staff. If it might be valuable for us to provide a letter, a letter by, like, drafted by us, stating our own reasoning that would accompany this proposal.
That's only usually if you have a minority report. We've got a unanimous.
I think there's room though, if there's a story that you wanna tell that we really can't tell. I mean, the recommendation letter, it's usually fairly standard. It's sort of
Yeah.
like, here's the criteria, here's what the motions were. We can only go so far in what we share for context. If there is a story that this planning commission wants to tell, we could attach a letter from the planning commission.
The Board of County Commissioners are gonna get copies of all the public testimony. And
They will.
bottom line is that we heard all the comments too. And we're acting on those comments that we heard and our best judgment as planning commissioners to how this code should be written. And I will tell you, the most impactful thing to the Board of County Commissioners is your testimony at this, when they discuss this point.
I will say a 1 to 2 page letter from the planning commission is a lot easier to digest than reading through all the public comment in the
That's true.
minutes.
Sounds like you're proposing a subcommittee.
That's what I'm starting to hear, but ping pong back.
I don't know how work sessions have gone since we've gone to a 5-member board. Are you still planning on doing a work session with the whole board at one time when presenting this particular? Will there be an invitation to the public to attend that work session? And will there be an opportunity for anyone in the planning commission to sit down there while that is happening?
There will be an invitation to the planning commission to participate, and we'll notice, just as we've been noticing throughout, opportunities for the public to listen in, even though there isn't public comment at
Okay.
the work session.
That's just my point.
Yeah, and I
Normally, there's not
just-
public comment.
I don't know if any of you other folks have actually sat in on a work session where they do talk to the planning commissioners, but it's a little less formal and you can really get a lot of good points across, so. In the past, they have been receptive to it. I don't know what the new board's like, but I imagine that they are just as receptive. It would surprise me if they weren't.
I think kind of building off of that, a letter, and then that person bringing that letter and kind of explaining their findings with that is articulated in that letter would be very helpful.
That sounds smart. Commissioner Bartlett?
Yeah, I wanted to second that, like, there's so much information being provided. There's so much public comment. There's like, and then like our meeting minutes and everything like that. I think that it probably behooves us to respect the amount of time that we've put into it, to have some sort of summary of our thoughts that we can sign off on, that we present to represent that, because it's otherwise gonna get a little bit more diluted than our opinion would otherwise be, necessarily, because there's so much more public comment on this.
Commissioner Pessinger?
I know I can be jocular sometimes, but I believe I made a motion.
We've been discussing many things since you made that motion. So,
Second.
I thought he was gonna volunteer to write the letter.
yeah, I thought so too, but no, he was paying attention to the
I
order.
volunteered.
Okay, so could you restate your motion? So we,
So moved.
I move that we affirm all of our recommendations other than the one that we
That's
just,
amended.
as amended. I move that we affirm our recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners as amended.
okay, and that
Second.
one had been moved and seconded, so. And we had much discussion, some of it pertinent to the topic. Any further discussion on the motion? before we take a vote? All right, let's call the roll for this one.
Commissioner Bumbarger,
Aye.
Commissioner Casino,
Aye.
Commissioner Howerson,
Aye.
Commissioner, she's not here. Sorry, Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Pessinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hansen,
Aye.
Chair Day.
Aye. Okay,
Okay, so that was just a motion on the small amendment to the title and with the little disclaimer piece as well of the recommendations you already provided. Now we're kind of moving on to other motions that are still relevant.
Excuse me, that motion was for the amendment to the title and the
Was for all five
inclusion
of them.
of all these recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then now, this is just the motion for formality that you all provided your 5 recommendations. I know you all have seen the slides and there are in fact 2 other motions, so I don't want you to feel restricted that those other 2 motions just won't count because it's his first one. But recommended potential first motion of like, you all, given what has been discussed so far, are okay with moving forward with adopting the definition and the related amendments along with your recommendations to the board.
I thought we just amended this recommendation on the title.
That's the docket number. It's the official docket number and title.
That's why everything has stayed like this presentation as well has stayed as community
This
housing.
motion is basically just to push the issue to the BOCC.
Okay,
Much better way to.
thanks, that helps me too.
move to accept motion 1.
Seconded.
Any discussion? We'll try and keep the discussion to the motion on 2. All right. With that, call for the vote. Call roll.
Commissioner Bumbarger,
Aye.
Commissioner Casino,
Aye.
Commissioner Howerson,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Pessinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hansen,
Aye.
Chair Day.
Aye.
Following up on similar things that Commissioner Pessinger mentioned, you all provided formal recommendations last time and you all have now motioned, those are set in stone. But there were additional things that you just wanted staff to research, and I felt it would be beneficial to have bucket motions as additional guidance to the board as far as the planning commission's recommendations of. There's the 5 formal things that you very explicitly want, but you think and feel as though there are other things that should be considered. And rather than specifying out the questions that I had to research in advance of this, keeping it as a bucket so that the board understands where you were coming from, but also should they have additional, like if this prompts additional thoughts, then your recommendation is considered this bucket for compliance and permitting restrictions.
One thing to add to that is that, so obviously we're gonna have the motion and the recommendation letter, but we do also come with findings. And those findings can include the different topic points that are discussed amongst the planning commission. So that it's not just a generic description, there are some high level or more specified topics to focus on.
Commissioner Bumbarger.
This might be tiny, but given the opinions of Bob Ferguson, approving this motion as written is saying these are restrictions, when in reality,
Requirement.
these are requirements for public safety. Or public and patient safety, honestly.
Conditions for public safety.
Yeah, conditions for public safety. I would not approve motion 2S written because of the term restrictions. I think it sets up a false dichotomy of, well, the Attorney General says this and the motion says restrictions and we can't do restrictions, so.
I
Yeah.
I agree. I have an alternative motion I'm prepared to make. I move to recommend the Board of County Commissioners explore all community concerns around compliance, permitting, security, and public safety in Thurston County Code for less restrictive alternative community housing facilities.
Seconded.
Excellent. All right. Any additional discussion? that will call for the vote.
Commissioner Bumbarger,
Aye.
Commissioner Casino.
Aye.
Commissioner Halverson,
Aye.
Commissioner Kaiser. Oh, she's not here, sorry. Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Pessinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Aye.
Vice Chair Day, or Hanson, sorry,
Aye.
Chair Day.
Aye.
Sure, a similar comment will be made on this motion. Feel free to amend as planning commission requests.
Insert the word conditions instead of restrictions.
We might, Andrew just pointed out, considering the amendment that Commissioner Pessinger just made around security.
It's irrelevant
We kind of
now.
already got at
It's
the
a
second one.
comprehensive motion. I don't think we need motion 3.
I agree.
Does anyone move, get rid of motion 3? No. Any commission joke?
We just saved some time. We didn't even have to discuss motion 3.
I planned it that way, actually. I wanted us to feel like we were moving along really well.
We really want Oneza to be able to like go eat. after the commission meeting.
Would you like some fruit?
We found one that'll be open.
Okay, all of that being said, just before I talk about next steps, I have your 5 recommendations. I also have the 2 motions in the recommendation letter that I will be printing out and giving to Chair Day following this planning commission meeting so that we can move this along. There will be additional staff. I'll call it a staff report, even though it's very different than the staff report provided for the public hearing. With all that has been done so far, we've had the work sessions, topics discussed, opinions from legal, conversations and whatnot, so the board has a really comprehensive package with this. Like we mentioned before, and like you brought up at our first work session, we will be letting you all know as the board steps progress, so that you all know when they're happening, if you'd like to attend, if you would like to provide public comment at any stage, so that you all are as informed as possible as this process goes along, as well as the public. I'm not just,
Thank you.
I favor you all as professionals, but I'm not gonna ignore the public as well in this process. So that being said, where we are in things, hoping for August, going to the board, they are on recess, so we'll see how scheduling goes. But you will be kept apprised of the situation as it moves forward. And if there's any drastic changes to the timeline, of course, everyone will be made aware of that as well.
Will staff be making a recommendation as well, or you just providing
I
information?
do not believe I'm able to provide a recommendation myself as staff. I am more so taking feedback from you all, ensuring that legal is involved in the conversation and just trying to make it
I just would
as
point
transparent
out
of a
that staff
document.
has in the past made recommendations that are
So-
different from the planning commission.
What we will do is we'll provide multiple optional recommendations, so they can either move to approve, move to amend, or move to reject or deny. And the board takes all the information they've received, the input they've received from the planning commission and the public, and they make their decision off all of that.
But you're not gonna stake a policy position.
No.
Okay,
I personally, as myself, do not feel comfortable stating a policy position. I want to ensure that I am just the process keeper and the conduit for the community on this specific project.
I would request, I
That's a
would
good-
request that we receive a copy of that information prior to any work session with the county commissioners, so that we have a chance to look at it and prepare our testimony at the work session.
Second.
And I think that would probably be, what we'd wanna write a letter kind of offering.
Okay.
So would be my,
So once we receive that, then write basically a letter to supplement.
I think so. Yeah,
I would,
we can say some things.
I will say that we will probably try to have that memo done around the middle of July towards the end. And so the. Well, drinks. I guess it is almost July. Try to get it done around the middle to the end of July, which will then give us around like the first or second week of August is we hope to get to the board. And hopefully that will be enough time for all of you to digest, produce any materials that you wish to make for that meeting. And I don't know if it will be through a subcommittee or whatnot, but we will have 2 meetings in July that you will have the option to create one if you wanted to on the 10th and the 17th. Before we get to August.
If at all possible, as soon as that is done, I would prefer it not wait until a physical meeting to be provided to us. If it would be possible to email it to us as soon as it's finalized. That way we could potentially work independently and come prepared in a meeting if we wanted to add it to an agenda.
Commissioner Halverson seconds it.
I second that.
That wasn't actually a motion, it was just a request.
You can still second the request. So do we have a sense of whether we'd wanna do this as a subcommittee? And do we have interest for a subcommittee?
I don't think it's actually necessary yet. I think I wanna see all the staff materials, or the work session packet before. Or the draft work session packet before we need to dive into it any deeper.
I think it's worthwhile that we save that as an option should it become necessary, but hopefully it won't.
Subcommittee won't be necessary.
I propose we form a subcommittee to study the usefulness of subcommittees.
The exploratory committee.
I do think that leaving, after that staff report is done, or draft staff report is done, leaving something on the agenda for us
For
to.
the
so we
subsequent
can-
meeting.
We can come back to it, and staff is prepared to come back for it.
I think that makes sense. And I just have to say, I really appreciate like how collaboratively you all are working with us on this.
Yeah, this one's tough.
This,
My first development committee.
Smooth sailing.
this has raised a lot of issues over the last year.
Yeah,
A lot of community input, not just at our meetings.
Yeah, and you all have done a great job of kind of.
Barry's been spending time on Reddit.
Yeah, of managing all of that consternation around this, so we appreciate it. All right, anything else on this agenda item before we move on?
I love it. We gave Anna LRA and housing as our first two project.
They're hazing you.
thank you very much.
We are a great place to work, awesome professional development opportunities.
I took the job because I wanted more things to do than I got at my previous employer, so I'm not complaining. I like the challenge.
Your previous employer, you have to just get the things. They don't give it to you. Moving on, to item number 6, we have the EIS scoping and alternatives.
We are 45 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yes.
So Commissioner Pessinger's efficient motion making right there. They requested I send them some stuff and I haven't gotten to it yet. I have files on my computer. It's just, once Pride season's over and I can step away from the nonprofits, I'll be.
Do we want to do a quick introduction to our guests tonight on the
Yes,
staff
sure.
side while we're getting the technology set up?
Please.
Hi, I'm Fergus Aneza from Burke Consulting. I have been enjoying all of your conversation and discussion. That's great. I am associate principal at Burke, and with me, we have Kevin Ramsey on the virtually, so hopefully, Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, can you all hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes, hi, I'm Kevin Ramsey. I'm also an associate principal at Burke, and I've been working with Anoza and the team on the housing element for the comprehensive plan and the EIS.
Right. So now we can share the screen. All right, so tonight we can go to the next slide, thank you. And we will be discussing two major topics of the comp plan. One is the SEPA EIS, environmental impact statement, and the other one is housing element updates. So in the first part, I will be talking about SEPA, if we could go to the next slide. And the next, thank you. So we will be talking about the purpose of the EIS, why we're doing this, the scoping alternatives for the EIS and overall schedule. And also planning commission's role in it. So you have the SEPA process is conducted by the SEPA responsible official, and for Thurston County is the planning director, planning and economic development director. And you are as part of your role, you will be the sounding board, you'll be reviewing the actions and policies and all of that. In the next slide, so the purpose of the EIS is when there is an action, certain actions, then there is a need for environmental review. And this is, the EIS would look at your, it gives the government and agencies, an option to comment. So when there is an action, we analyze the environmental impact of it, we assess it. And also through the public process, it gives agencies options to comment on. And then once we get the comments back, we address those comments and we update those. So that's pretty much the whole process. Also, how do we address the adverse environmental impact and the mitigation? So I'm sure you all know this, but I just wanted to remind ourselves. So in terms of the schedule, so we will have, once we have the scoping notice, then there will be 21-day comment period. And then based on the comments we get and we draft the EIS, then there will be, and the county will publish it for public comments, and there will be 30 days comment period. And then based on those comments, then we will finalize the EIS. And then the final EIS will be in front of the agency actions. So you will be reviewing it, and then your county commissioners will be reviewing before taking any major actions. If we could go to the next slide. So this is an overall EIS process. So first, like I said, it's the scoping process, and then with the scoping notice, we get comments from agencies and public. And we address those as like, what are the likely impacts that might happen? So we prepare ourselves in terms of how we address this. And then we draft the EIS, and then the 30-day comment period, and then final EIS. And then we go back to the county action. In the next slide. So the topics that we will be addressing in the EIS are generally built and natural environment. And within the environmental topics, environment and built environment topics, these are the topics that we are looking at. Land use, and then housing, transportation, public services, and then utilities. So we look at those from the environmental perspective and analyze those.
We've got a question, if it's okay.
Is it okay to ask questions during the presentation, or I can come back to slide 7 at the end, it doesn't matter.
We can have the conversation now.
Natural systems, especially surface and groundwater resources. Is that including wildlife habitat, endangered species, et cetera?
Yes.
Yes, it'll be coming up, but the Habitat Conservation Program EIS is actually the basis
Okay.
for this supplemental EIS, and so that'll definitely be a part of it. So wildlife habitat, as you may recall, there are a number of new policies being proposed in the Chapter 9 update. I will say, I'm actually looking right now at what does King County have for biodiversity and things like that we could base maybe some either analysis on or policies on. We don't have the kind of reports available. It doesn't mean that we can't do something, but we'll have to do some research to figure out how to pull that in.
Okay, so that was just one of the things that you ought to be looking at. It has not been approved by ecology yet, is the Shoreline Master Program.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're assuming for purposes of this, that it's the updated SMP
Right.
that's being folded in, not the existing one.
Thank you.
Yes.
That was what I wanted.
It will hopefully be adopted by the time the comp plan is adopted.
Oh, that's so.
Just a clarifying question, you just said that this is supplemental EIS? What do you mean by that?
It just means that it provides some flexibility in terms of the number of action alternatives and the scope.
Yeah.
So this is an EIS or a supplemental EIS? I don't know the difference.
There really is not gonna be any difference in terms of like what is brought before you. We will be, pulling what we can from that, but for all intents and purposes, it's gonna be a full EIS for the planning commission to review.
In terms of alternatives for EIS, we're looking at two alternatives. We're looking at no action alternative that talks about your current trends that you already have been discussing, the 14% growth. And then the other action item, the proposed action that we are looking at is the sustainable Thurston option that you have been discussing as well. That's the 5% growth. So we will be reviewing those, and in terms of proposed action, we will be reviewing how you're gonna achieve the 5%, what are the environmental impacts, and how the rural residential and cluster approach or other resource land protections are going to play out in this. And then, yeah, so let's go to the next slide. And then for each of the topics that I just mentioned, like land use, housing, transportation, all of those, so we will be looking at on your right side, what you're looking at that's the overall framework of EIS. And we will be looking at affected environment, number 4. So those would be like, we are looking at what's in there now, existing condition. We assess the impacts and then identify how those impacts can be mitigated, the mitigation measures. And then overall, we'll just assess the significance of that. So let's go to the next slide. So this is where you were asking like whether it's a supplemental EIS. I mean, like Ashley has mentioned this already. Some of the benefit, so we are basing this off of your habitat conservation plan EIS because there a lot of work has been done on that. But the topics that we are mentioning, land use and housing, those have not been assessed under the HCP EIS. So this will be added on. And then also in addition to that, we will have the cities are doing their SEPA work. So you will be sort of like bundling those as part of appendices to your SEPA process.
So we'll use the urban cities SEPAs in our UGAs?
For the UGAs.
As the county, our EISs have to encompass everything in the county. We don't necessarily have the resources to look at all of the cities, and so we're essentially going to pull in whatever SEPA analysis they're doing.
Into the UGAs though.
They're looking at UGAs. I mean, it gets fuzzy. It's like all of our transportation modeling, looking at the whole county, that interplay. When you talk about water availability, we have to offset, you know, for.
I guess what I'm saying is I understand where if you use, let's say the city of Olympia SEPA for that portion of the county's plan or SEPA, but then to take the city of Olympia SEPA and overlay that over this Ole UGA to cover that instead of using SEPA that we use for the county. I guess the assumption is then that the UGA is more urban than it is rural.
Well, if you're thinking about assessing impacts, you would want to look
The
20
impact,
years
yeah.
ahead, full build out rather than its current rural state. Whether that happens or not, I mean, you're really just looking at what are the impacts of this full build out happening.
I think I guess my big concern is I see that there are lots of spots in our UGAs that are never, I wish our UGAs were cleaned up. I guess that's why I'm getting, I wish our UGAs.
I don't
were
think
cleaned
the EIS is probably the vehicle for that, but.
up. Yeah, probably not, but it does make me feel a little squishy when I see that we're gonna take some urban EIS SEPA determinations and put them on areas of the UGA that we know are never going to be incorporated because of a million different other reasons. But
And
that's
some,
probably a little more,
we haven't done an EIS for a comp plan update since, what was it, 96? Was that the big box on your desk for a while? This is it's not that it's uncharted territory. Obviously, lots of other counties do EISs with their comp plan update, but we are the only county that joint plans and is also doing an EIS. And so we've been having lots of conversations with Burke, who have done lots of EISs to figure out that interplay for our joint planning areas. And we do want to respect the memorandums of understanding that we have in place with our jurisdictional partners and make sure that we are honoring the fact that they lead in the joint planning process. So we don't want our EIS, we're going at a faster pace than our cities right now, and we want to make sure we're not leading their planning effort in those joint planning areas just by virtue of the fact that we're out of the gate.
okay.
So schedule wise, we're here. We are planning on having a scoping notice out by summer. and then the draft EIS in fall for public comments. And then final EIS in 2025. So that's where we are.
Do we have any type of, I mean, 2025 is 12 months. Do we have?
Early 2025.
Okay.
Yes. Good point. That's a wide window, but we are looking at like, and like January, February, around that time frame. Yeah. So that's about the EIS, and then the housing discussion. Kevin will, yes,
Before we move on to housing, can we ask some EIS questions?
yes.
We had a public commenter that had a lot of interesting ideas related to EIS elements. I personally am in support of all of them. But I would like to hear your perspective on what you thought of those recommendations.
You mean recommendations for?
Betsy's public
Okay,
comment.
okay, yeah.
The piece of paper is right there.
Yeah, it might be helpful to see. I tried to jot it down.
I was writing, I
Primarily-
just copied all the text and.
True. Well, and Betsy has already sent it.
So what we're doing now, this is a good timing for this letter to come in. So we're developing the scoping notice right now. So once the scoping notice will go out, we will have lots of comments, including Betsy's. We will look into this, and then we'll work with all of you and especially county staff to see what to include in the draft GIS. So to that end, scoping is more like, okay, this is what we are planning on addressing. And then public comments, and then after we get public comments, wildlife habitat, any other additional topics, then we prepare the draft EIS and include and address those into that.
I would imagine the final item in there about habitat for spotted frogs and things like that is included in the HCP. But there's stuff on there that's not, like white oak stuff and
So
Oregon white oak and.
those would be part of the critical areas review, so those are definitely included. I will say the only one, and that's why I'm doing research right now, that may be more challenging, not that we wouldn't want to do it, is the biodiversity one. Only because we don't have we have pieces of the information, but if you look at, I mean, this is amazing, King County has a whole biodiversity report with maps, like all this stuff. In terms of being able to direct Burke to assess impacts, might not look the same as this, like it might just, yeah, I don't know, we'll have to do some creative thinking, because we don't have it mapped or reported on or analyzed in the same way as maybe some of our partner counties, and we can chat with Betsy about other examples of maybe, counties that haven't done full reports but are still doing assessments. And I don't know, Burke, have you done any kind of biodiversity impact assessments?
I have to look because I know that we have and our partners have done in some of the EISs. But I have to look into it. But as far as the Thurston County EIS topics, our natural systems EIS topic right now, we have identified surface and groundwater system because that's one of the crucial element for the county. So that's what we have identified, and our assumptions has been that your HCP has done a lot of those analysis, but we will look into that.
The HCP is a 30-year plan. And so we can go back and make sure that anything referenced in there is also pulled into the comp plan. I will say US Fish won't allow us to develop at a rate faster than we are mitigating. So there are some protections built into there. They will essentially just pull our incidental take permit, and we have to report to them on an annual basis for every single permit that gets issued in the county, the square footage of habitat impacted, the funds that have been collected, and the habitat that we're conserving. There's a little bit of grace period during this first year. But by year 3, if we don't have land protected in all of our service areas, we're not gonna have an incidental take permit. We'll just have to shut.
I thought we had a jump start on our mitigation.
We do, but we have lots of service areas. So we do have land conserved in three of our pocket gopher service areas. Oh no, 4 now. Hopefully in the next few weeks we'll have 4. And we have Oregon spotted frog. We're 5 years ahead in most of our service areas, but we're still lacking Olympia pocket gopher.
Is there any bottlenecks besides funding and available land?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, so
Those are big.
there's, yeah, but there's nothing saying like you can't, if you have projected development, you can't be
No, and
3,
we-
4, 5 years ahead.
Nope, there's nothing that says we can't be ahead, and so
Okay.
we're trying to stay at least, the directive we've gotten from the board is to stay at least 2 years ahead. And
Okay.
we are doing a good job on all fronts. Olympia Pocket Gopher is gonna be the biggest challenge. And we have things that are in the pipeline. But, sorry, that's a little bit off topic, but just to sort of reassure that there are safeguards built into that.
Just to continuing that, I've heard conflicting information that I wonder if you have any data on how much legacy forest habitat is in the county and how much Oregon white oak prairies habitat is in the county. And then second, I've heard recently that there's threats from DNR to potentially log all legacy forests here in Thurston County in the near future. Do you know anything about that?
I can't speak to the last item. We do have legacy forests mapped. Kevin Hansen has this big map. You could come in and look at it. Where he's trying to identify those legacy forests. And shoot, it was legacy
The
forest.
white oak
Oh, Oregon white
prairies.
oak. We actually have one of the most protective critical areas ordinances. We don't just protect the individual white oaks, we protect the area around white oaks because they're seen as a community. And so we will, the planning commission, if you decide to all stay with us, following right on the comp plan update will be our critical areas ordinance update. I can't imagine those protections being lessened, but all that to say, all those are mapped. We have them all mapped. And so,
A pretty significant amount or pretty small amount?
I mean, if anything, those our oak savannas are gonna be growing as our prairies are restored.
What's the definition of legacy forest now?
Can I phone a friend and get back to you later in the meeting? I just don't know the exact number.
I've heard
of
several
years.
different versions.
So,
Google, there's a lot of data.
I know.
I just looked the other day. It's a lot.
I've kind of question, have comment. So I'm going back through my annals and back to policy school. And, so when we think about an environmental, impact statement, like this is really just like, this is an evaluation of like what happens if we do different things,
Mhm.
right? So, so its usefulness is in kind of deciding between the two, or like, in this case, the two options, either do something or do nothing. And I think the thing that would be most important in my mind is the difference between the 15% and the 5%, if I recall.
14 and 5.
14 and 5. And the, you know, the value in a impact statement isn't that we're gonna like do, I mean, you can get comments on it and it might change your mind, but it's not a really a like, aside from the public comment portion of it, it's not really a meaningful. This is what you learn in policy school. It's not really a.
Actionable.
Yeah, it's not actionable, it's not directive, it's about just putting information out and collecting feedback on it. But I think the value in something like this would be highlighting what the differences would be between that 4% and that 15%. And the more things that we could show that would be negatively affected by that 4% to that 15%, I think we could pretty easily say that those would have, like, it's more people, it's more development, and those are going to likely have adverse impacts on things like fish and wildlife, at least and I think beyond just the water resources, I think there's open space, there's available land, there are things like, you know, tree canopy, it's, you know, associated with water resources. Our ability to look at wildlife corridors is gonna be impacted by additional development. So, I would support a broader scope for that reason, not because it's, you know, something that necessarily changes the course, but helps illuminate and elucidate the two different options. Commissioner Pessinger and Commissioner Berkman.
I agree. I think these EISs are helping us to try to make trade-off decisions, and I just listened to this last night, but 1970 song by Joni Mitchell, the choice is paving paradise or put up a parking lot.
Or warehouse. Commissioner Berkman.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize what you just mentioned about corridors that have actually been going to be part of the substance of what I wanted to say is that I really would like to see a lot of focus on habitat connectivity through this growth process. And I do recognize that looking at biodiversity, especially since biodiversity is a broad term, can be very resource intensive, but I would strongly encourage whatever creative solution that you have to do that, because it doesn't seem like an environmental impact statement that doesn't look at the actual diversity of the environment being impacted is going to be terribly valuable. So that's just my recommendation is I really would like to look at connectivity and biodiversity as priorities.
And I think there's I think there's a way to talk about biodiversity as like a function of habitat diversity, connectivity, and quality. So I think if which is essentially what the necessary components for biodiversity. We're not gonna put more animals on the landscape. We're gonna make sure the landscape can support them.
Yeah, it's that whole, when a jurisdiction goes through the process of creating a report, it's like they figure out the methodology and a mutually agreed upon definition of it, and we might need the planning commission's help. Like, we have all the data, like when I pop open a map that King County has, it's like, oh yeah, we have all that data, it's just not packaged that way. So I think you're right, if we can talk about it more as like, this is, we achieve greater biodiversity if we ensure these other things are protected more. Just because we don't have a nice glossy report yet. That's also a policy that the planning commission could put as a comp plan.
I think you
is to
could
look into that.
juxtapose between those two different options, like what the anticipated impacts would be. So again, related, I think that's the most important question here, is that difference in population.
So like King County, I was digging into their comp plan. They have a whole section on biodiversity and a lot of policies speaking to biodiversity. We don't have that in chapter 9 or any other part of our code. It's not that like, we don't have anything that like lends itself to biodiversity, but it's not called out as a specific ecological function that the county is looking to do.
Inventory that.
It definitely, other jurisdictions are trying to, and in the European Union, they're even selling biodiversity credits. So I'm just, so it is, I'm putting it out there as like, this is something that I didn't realize until I was actually at that conference when, during the last planning commission meeting, I was like, oh, well, yes, of course, like all the things we're doing are supposed to improve biodiversity. But, so they started looking to see what other counties are doing, and there are definitely counties that are, embracing that and developing policy frameworks for that. If you have policies in place, then it's easier to go after funding to do that kind of analysis. And it's not that the data doesn't exist, it's just the way that you piece that data together and the story you tell.
Yeah, Commissioner Baumgartner.
Yeah, so what I've heard over this conversation is that the data that we do have might be disparate, or it might not paint a complete picture. And I detecting a bit of reticence to put that on paper if it doesn't paint a complete picture. And I guess what I would just like to state is that I think a good first effort is still worth doing, even if we admit that our data is patchy or incomplete in areas, because we need a beginning state, even if it's an imperfect measurement, to know, at least in those areas we do have information on, whether we're getting better or worse. And so it's worth including. That's all I want to add.
Yeah, I would support a separate analysis of biodiversity and connectivity. If we wanted to encourage that as a board.
The risk of going down the rabbit hole, I think the piece that we probably have the most opportunity around is probably biodiversity and connectivity with I-5 running straight down the middle of.
Cutting us in half.
We did try to reflect all of the efforts around connectivity across I-5. We did introduce new policies in chapter 9 that speak directly to that, and the organization's working on that. And saying that the county was open to collaborative partnerships. So yeah, we can build off of that. There is a framework there. I will say for the water pieces, those are really critical missing pieces, and our tribal partners are the ones that have really been asking for us to assess impacts to water availability between these two options.
Should we move on to the next?
Easy topic.
Talk about there.
So Kevin is there and he's gonna talk about some housing analysis and findings, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll be having some policy discussion. I mean, not the entire policy, but you will be seeing what is coming up next, probably the next meeting. Kevin.
All right, thanks. So yeah, we're working on doing a pretty detailed housing needs assessment as part of the housing element for the comprehensive plan. And today I'm going to be highlighting some key statistics, some findings, and kind of orienting you all to the types of analysis that we're going to be providing, some of which is kind of newly required from new statewide legislation on how to do comp plans. So on this slide here, we're talking about some stats around, with a focus on unincorporated Thurston County. So, there's, almost 144,000 people living in the unincorporated county. 88,000 of them are in rural areas. So a significant number of folks are living in rural areas. Grand Mound UGA is a lot smaller. It's got less housing. It's about 1,400 residents there. In terms of housing, we've got about 35,000 units in the rural areas, a little over 400 in Grand Mound. And this map here looks at incomes. The median income is almost $89,000 for as of 2022 in the county. But there's a lot of variation across the county, particularly when you look at rural areas. You'll have some rural areas that are much on the higher end, and some that are some of the poorest areas of the county. Highlighting here, two of those areas are, a good part of Grand Mound UGA, as well as some area east of Lacey. It's right outside of the Nisqually Indian Reservation, where the incomes are median income is below $60,000 a year, so significantly less. And this has an impact on housing affordability, of course. One stat we pulled is that, in unincorporated Thurston County, there's nearly 6,000 households that are spending over half of their income on housing. HUD defines that as severely cost burdened. There's many more thousand that are cost burdened that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So there's quite a bit of housing need already in the county, in addition to planning for future population growth. Next slide. We're also looking at housing affordability. Right now, the typical, single family house price is $492,000, and that's a typical home. A new home is, they come in a lot higher than that, of course. And that's not affordable to anyone below about 120% of the area median income in the county. Rents, the typical rent is over $2,000 now, and again, like newer apartments and newer homes are renting for more than that, as some of the examples you guys mentioned earlier on.
Hey, Kevin?
Yeah.
Keith? Oh, sorry, I can't read your name from that, how tiny you are in the corner. Question, so other places we've used median or average, but we're using typical here. Just a question on what we mean when we say typical.
Yeah, great question. The data that I'm sharing here is from Zillow. And it is, I think they use typically very carefully because of how the data is derived. It's not looking at something like median sales price, which would reflect just the types of homes that are on the market, for example, because the types of homes that are selling on the market are not necessarily typical of the entire housing stock. Does that make sense? Because the homes that are selling might be like newly built homes, so it might the median sales price might be, you know, turned higher than the typical home price. Does that make sense?
It does. So what I'm gathering is that the actual algorithmic data there is not something we have transparency to. We're sort of trusting Zillow on this one.
That's yes, that is correct. They do have quite a bit of methodology documentation that we link to, and how they do this. But it does you know look at the entire single family housing stock of Thurston County, and it has data about values for those homes. It has sales data, and it does some modeling to estimate the current home sales value of homes. But because it is a combination of modeling and actual data, they use the word typical to describe what I think could be understood as a median among the housing stock, if that makes sense. But it's not literally a median from a statistical perspective.
Yeah, and I guess my follow-up question would be, so when we say typical rent, we're factoring in what people are currently paying who are on long-term leases or month to month. This isn't just looking at what new rentals cost, right?
Exactly.
I guess then, for if you guys are open to feedback on that, we're talking about growth here. These are folks who aren't going to be locked into low rents right now. It's going to be people getting new rents. And so that number is deceptively low compared to someone coming into the area and buying a home or getting a rental. And so if this is the statistic we're looking at, we're painting a rosier picture about the affordability of this county for people who are growing the population here than just as a whole. Just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And as we write this up in the housing needs assessment, we do make those types of points for sure. And it's not hard to reference things like median sales prices, and anecdotes of what new homes are selling for as well in the county. But I think those are all really good points. Even at these levels, though, the majority of rural residents are not able to afford owning a home at these levels. The majority of residents in the county are able to afford these prices, at least for the home sales prices. And certainly the majority of renters aren't able to afford that rent currently.
There's a question.
Yep.
I'm following along with the same interest in this data. And I just looked at that and did the math on the county median household of 88,895. Your framing of the cost burden is 30% or more of your income on housing. That equals $2,222 per month. With anything more than that would make them cost burden for the median household income in the county. And typical home price of $492,000. A mortgage calculator as of today's interest rate would have a mortgage payment of $2,779. Typical rent is already closing in on $2,222 a month. So we're basically at a point where already every new home we built and every new housing unit we create is cost burdensome to the average.
You probably used a 20% down payment for that.
Yeah. Also doesn't happen very
To my point too, that this is taking in homes that aren't on the market. And it's taking in rents that are lower and locked in and maybe slowly increasing year to year, but are not what new rents are.
Anna says that a new rent in Yelm of 2,400 sounds like a bargain. That's concerning.
2,300, but you'd need, for 30%, you'd need an $84,000 income. Sorry.
Commissioner Bartlett.
Actually, correct.
So one thing that could be interesting, like it's this difference between like what's the cost of entry into the community versus the cost to live here. And that does reflect the current housing stock, so it might be an interesting thing to look at. I don't know. Like comparing it to the typical home price, but Commissioner Burton.
Just a little bit of a reinforcer on this is that, I know from my own experience as a renter that, a lot of rents were, positively from the perspective of the tenant, impacted by the pandemic in terms of being locked in at lower rates than the larger market trends. So that is an additional exacerbating factor for any existing.
As those unwind, yeah.
As those are, as everyone that I know is currently getting at the end of their deals. And that's something that's gonna be unique to renting versus, housing purchases.
Yep, all good points. So with a focus on the rural county, something that we added to the map here are registered manufactured home communities, also known as mobile home parks. There are 81 of them in the rural county and 5 in Grand Mound, and these are hosting well over 2,000 households. They don't have very complete data on that, so it's somewhat more than that. And that this is providing one kind of major component of the relatively more affordable housing in the rural county, and housing residents who are relatively more vulnerable due to their incomes as well as the kind of circumstance living in a manufactured home community. And it's so we want to kind of call that to our attention from a planning and comp planning perspective. It's an interesting issue. And when we did outreach with service providers in the county about what they're seeing in terms of housing needs, particularly in the rural county, we heard that there's in addition to registered manufactured home communities, there's kind of extensive use of unpermitted structures and vehicles on rural lots as housing, informal housing in areas, which is more evidence that there is a shortage of affordable housing countywide, and when that happens, folks are pushed into informal settlement type of situations like that, where they're unregulated, kind of more vulnerable, and it's more evidence of the housing shortage and housing needs in the county.
Can I interject just momentarily, because I think it's worth noting that while there are folks who are doing this because there is no affordable housing, I think it's important to keep dignity in the conversation, and there are people who do choose to live in that way. So it's an interesting distinction of how do we ensure that we address the housing needs in a dignified way and ensuring the autonomy of the people who live here, while also recognizing that it's impossible to find housing because of how expensive it is and how the market is going. So I just wanted to interject with that piece real quick.
One person's vulnerable might be another person's freedom.
Exactly.
Commissioner Casino?
I might not understand this very well, but my impression is that in the rural county, there has not been any new manufactured home communities, and the big bottleneck to that is if you can only get 3 units per acre on septic, and then you add in 1 to 5 zoning, building a mobile home park in rural areas is near impossible. So will we be able to use this as a vehicle to maybe make some changes where we could add some manufactured home communities? It'd be very interesting to hear when the last one was established in the rural community, but I bet you it's been half a century.
I think you hit on the challenge. It's not even as much of a land use challenge as it is, how do you provide septic? So we have been talking to our public health folks about, are there ways that we could support a developer of a manufactured home park in trying to get like an approval for a LOSS, large on-site septic system. Is there a role that we can play, even though we're not the permitter, to incentivize or support those kinds of developments? I mean, it's one small piece of the puzzle, but that's the biggest challenge we keep running into is septic.
It's not
So-
the only way to manage.
So if we could go through, so if we gotta go obviously through public health on trying to figure out the septic issue. From CPED standpoint, we could start adding in mobile home parks as a permitted use.
There, I can verify. Do you know offhand if there are special use provisions already for manufactured home parks?
I don't, but I can look very quickly.
Yeah.
But
There
on a
might already
policy
be,
level, we
there
could-
might already be special use provisions. But I mean, I think it's something we could look into, at least even within our landlords,
Mhm.
but septic.
I
And
think
this-
it could also be an opportunity to look into alternatives to traditional waste management systems. Septic systems aren't the only thing that's out
Mhm. Put them right on the
there. Pretty
creek.
terrible.
Can you elaborate on that? That was, my question had been,
Yeah.
could you elaborate on that?
Like there are codes in some areas of Oregon where they're built for like composting systems. So, yeah, we push our waste into our water. We don't need to do that, but you're
Gonna
gonna
go back to his topic. If you want to continue this topic, go ahead.
It seems like a really natural pairing for a rural area to be doing composting systems and agriculture, so.
there are European countries where they do curbside compost pickup.
Mine might be slightly regressing. I know yours is slightly regressing too.
On manufactured home communities, I have a lot of interest and have had a lot of friends who've experienced the last 30+ years there in this county, and it is not exactly super appealing as it might have seemed. It seems very appealing when the average cost of entry is somewhere around 120 to 150,000. But the rents have gone up more than one would expect, and they were 30 years ago, 20 years ago, they were probably about $150, $200, $300 a month in that range. They're now up around $800 to $900 a month just for renting the land upon which your home that you purchased sits
That's
on.
right.
There was an interesting sort of analytics that was done on this on a TV show. That a lot of national corporations have found this to be a great investment vehicle. There's 3 companies in America that are buying up huge volumes of manufactured home parks. Because they've found that what they have is a captive audience, that they can raise rents all they want and there's no choice and there's no moving, because you move that thing, you're destroying it. It's very difficult to move it without wrecking the actual
Well, you also can't.
architectural.
If it's
Yeah.
older than a certain,
Yeah.
my parents, yeah, my parents live in one. They only paid 8,000 for theirs about 8 years ago. And yeah, you can't move it. You can't put it on a legal lot.
And there's
outside of the
still what
park.
many people choose because of the price point and entry, but it's not necessarily a great long-term solution. And there have been a lot of state legislation, even last year, there was a number of good laws proposed that made it out of committee around giving the homeowners in those parks first right of opportunity in case of sale, that they could buy the underlying property. And even though they had widespread public support, none of them made it to a vote. And it's every provision that's been held out as a new legal improvement in that arena for the homeowners there has not gone very far. I hope we do more. I hope we do more to make that type of housing available and not another way of ripping people off or exploiting people.
Commissioner Baumgartner then.
Yeah, so my point was actually very similar to yours, but it was more about the statistics. So when we're talking home sale prices, are we factoring in the sale of mobile homes in that? And again, I'm assuming since this is from Zillow, we're sort of trusting the secret sauce there. And then when we're talking about rents, we're not factoring in lot rents. And so again, I think that's another area where these already depressingly high statistics are misleading, because yeah, $150,000 mobile homes actually are hard to find in Thurston County. Some of them are like 200, or if you're in with Olympia city limits, it's $350,000 and
Especially
you
if you're not over
still don't own the land. Yeah, and so it might be nice that we're averaging some of those down and then that our average home price is low, but when you're tacking on $700 to $900 in lot rent, it's in some cases more expensive than just buying a house. yes, that was my piece. I know we probably, I don't know what kind of transparency we have on how Zillow produce their data, but it'd be nice to know how that gets factored in.
I'm fairly certain that mobile or manufactured homes in communities where they don't own the lot are not factored into that typical home price. There are, one thing that we noticed when we looked at permitting trends in rural county is that a significant portion of the new homes built or placed in the rural county actually are manufactured homes, but I think most or all of them are not in these communities. They're being placed on private lots, and where the owner of the land owns the home as well, and those very well may be factored in, and they are coming in at a more affordable price point than a typical site built home. So that manufactured homes are also playing a role in the housing system in that way.
I will say, so we do have special use provisions for mobile manufactured home parks. The most limiting factor is that it has to comply with rural density, the underlying density of the zoning district. We could do research to see if there's any flexibility in that.
I'd like to see that.
Would other planning commissioners like to see that?
Yes.
We already have a framework in place for allowing them. I think that as we move into the development regulation portion of the housing update, we had already flagged this as one of the areas that we'd like Berk's help with. And yeah, whether we combine it with clustering for density transfer or, who knows, but I think we could find some creative solutions.
If there's any way to make it so it's not necessarily a mobile that has to be placed there too, like the Rush development that they're doing out in Yelm. I mean, if that's 50 units on 12 acres, that's not very efficient with the land, but if a mobile home park can hold 10 to 12 to 15 per acre, but somebody wanted to come in and build 10 to 12 to 15 per acre stick built, small, maybe like tiny village type stuff. I think anything density is better than putting a bunch of mobiles on 5 acre lots by themselves. So getting them down dense and doing whatever we can to add to housing stock would be beneficial.
So the rural clustering that you saw in the EIS plays into that a little bit, as the county is looking to conserve land as we're required to under our habitat conservation program. Are there opportunities to then, like if we're buying the resource parcel, let's say 100 acres, county buys conserves the resource parcel in some way, don't necessarily buy it, with an easement on it. If you can transfer the density to the remaining 10 acres, are there opportunities there to create a rural affordable housing development?
That'd be fantastic.
So you're still like maintaining that overall rural density. We're not saying that all of a sudden, you're gonna see 12 units per acre out in the county without ensuring that you're conserving the land that would support that
So
shift.
in a second, this is actually kind of an interesting one, because you might actually have the right circumstances for a like transfer of development rights. Like if we think all the way back to our like long-term agriculture conversations, like if there is demand for increased density for something that we could legally accommodate, and right now what we have is an artificial cap kind of below what the market would ask for. Like you've got your space for a transfer of development rights there. And then one thing, because we always run into the rural nature of the
Rural aesthetic.
rural character. And I think there could be a really big opportunity to push back on that, because there's a long history of providing dense housing in rural areas for farm workers. And I think that rural character doesn't mean this bucolic, like one white house on 20 acres.
Giant useless lawns.
Yeah, or just, surrounded by unused former farmland.
1 in 5s as far as you can see.
Exactly, that's.
I actually just saw King County today. I was looking at their TDR provisions, and they allow TDR to be used to support increased size of an accessory dwelling unit. So let's say outright permitted detached accessory dwelling unit size is 800 square feet. You can purchase a development right from a farmer to bump it up. That's an interesting one. I hadn't
Cap
thought
on
of.
ADU size though, do we?
Ours are only attached.
They don't have for detached ADUs.
For new detached, you are held to a percent of the size of the primary structure up to like 1,400 square
Yeah.
feet.
Oh, I get, sorry, I was thinking, the density piece. You have to stay with whatever density is allowed in the underlying parcel. But those are other things, like we know people wanna go bigger, like we have been told by our Brett Burrows, Development Services Manager, that our ADUs are much bigger than the ones in the city. I don't know if there's a way to turn that into an opportunity to also support conservation.
1,400 square feet for an ADU is a pretty good size. Because most ADUs are for adult children and for parents or something like that. At least that's what we see out there in the Elm area.
So I'm gonna do a little bit of a time check. The packet's still pretty heavy. We've got to go through. I'm just gonna note that because we've got some meaty stuff coming up, it looks like.
Thank you.
And I think we are having a like deep dive conversation about what we'd like to see in the comp plan while we're really going over data. Try to enjoy. One climate point and then Commissioner Bartlett and then we could.
This is just a point, the what people pay for their rent or their mortgage is not their only huge factor. I work in insurance regulation, and so right now homeowners insurance is prohibitively expensive and people are getting canceled for very minor things. Clustered housing actually reduces risk and then drops the cost of that, and so clustering like that could potentially lower the total housing cost because these individual lots are not surrounded by wildfire hazards. They can have natural barriers around them. There's entire parts of the eastern part of the state where you cannot get a homeowner's insurance policy because of the fire risk. And the only areas where they're still permitting are developments and areas that are more segregated from the forest land. So a condensed area where there could be a more clear barrier would be safer and they might be able to get cheaper or easier access to those policies.
Defensible space.
Yes.
Mr. Bird, you better maintain your house when they take satellite photos.
Oh, a little bit of moss and they'll say you gotta replace the whole roof or we're canceling you. I'm not even joking.
I also would encourage, I know that Thurston County has a surprisingly large and growing number of cooperatively owned mobile homes. And I think that cooperative, like land trusts and cooperative homeownership are really a part of the solution to this. That would definitely affect that property price that we're talking about. Usually would be a little bit shared. And it gets into some of this exploitative rent. I'd be interested in looking at how that affects the data going forward.
Thank you for indulging our deep dive.
All right, great points. All right, I'll move along here. Another big theme in the needs assessment is looking at disparities. And this is another thing that new statewide legislation is kind of requiring jurisdictions to look at in their comp plan. This slide here looks at home ownership disparities when comparing white households to either Hispanic or Latino households or BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color households. And you'll see here, the darker blue there is the owner occupied, the lighter gray there is renter occupied, and there you can see there is a significant disparity between white and Hispanic households. However, when compared to the statewide, it's actually a smaller disparity in Thurston County, which was an interesting finding. But yet the disparity is, of course, still there. And that's across both BIPOC as well as Hispanic households. Next slide. We're also looking at disparities in in access to different housing markets. Exclusion is the word used in the legislation. And this is a map that allows us to kind of look at that. So in countywide, there's 29% of all the residents are BIPOC, or they identify as Hispanic, Latino, or a race other than white. And this map shows, basically colors different census block groups based on they're bluer if there's a much lower share of BIPOC residents compared to the entire county, and red have a much higher share of BIPOC residents compared to the county average. And you'll see that on this map, a big area is like the Nisqually Indian Reservation there on the east of Lacey. There is one place that's, including the kind of east side of Lacey, are areas that kind of pop in terms of where you'll see a much larger share, which is potential evidence of segregation. It's a strong word, but where certain racial ethnic groups are clustered. It can be because of inability to access other parts of the housing market, perhaps due to affordability or other reasons, and of course it could also be due to choice. So more research needs to be done to kind of explain those factors, but this is helping to understand what are the patterns across the county. And the next slide does the same thing, but for Latino and Hispanic households. You'll see a slightly different pattern here. About 10% of residents countywide identify as Hispanic or Latino. And here are some of the hotspots you'll see in terms of where these households are concentrated are, Grand Mound UGA is one big one, as well as kind of outside of Lacey there in some of the UGA areas as well. And of course, there's other areas of the county that have a much lower concentration. Next slide. So what we're going to be getting at is in this housing element, a big core part of it is showing that you have the capacity to meet your housing targets. So the alternatives that Oneza talked about earlier include specific housing targets for the rural area and for Grand Mound. And those targets are set at different income levels. It's not just one overall housing target, but it's at these different income levels. And the requirement for the county is to show that they have the capacity to meet those targets at each income level. And this chart here, or this table here, shows the way in which the Washington Department of Commerce is kind of a framework they've set up for helping jurisdictions to kind of look at that capacity. And it's really relating different types of housing to what income levels can they reasonably afford, either in market rate development, or are they feasible for subsidized affordable housing if the funders are funding is available to build it. So this table identifies four different housing types. So low-rise multifamily is a format that you'll sometimes see in UGAs. So we're talking about like walk-up apartment buildings, like three floors is a standard one. It's a pretty common format for more affordable housing projects kind of outside of big cities. And this is kind of thought of as a housing type that has potential to serve those lower income levels. Of course, a market rate development wouldn't typically, but a newer one in particular. But having zoning for that provides the conditions where more affordable housing could be built if the funding's available. Then there's moderate density housing types. Here we're talking about townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, different types of attached housing that's not as dense as apartment buildings. It's often called the missing middle or middle housing. These are really targeting more moderate income households in the 80 to 120 that really don't have the income to afford a new single family home or any single family home really, but might be able to access a more ownership market or a larger thing than an apartment. We have low density, which is typical single family home areas, which is, right now, basically the entire rural county would be put in that category. Where single family homes is what you're able to build there. And really, for new housing, you're only serving that very highest income bracket at over 120% of MFI. And there's also ADUs, and that's something that comes up. And this framework kind of allows for the possibility that ADUs could potentially serve some of that upper side of the lower income housing, like the 50 to 80% of MFI. If these are these newer 1,400 or 1,400 square foot units that you were just talking about, that probably wouldn't be hitting that price point, frankly. But there is potential in terms of attached ADUs and whatnot to meet those needs. So looking at capacity for ADUs is one option as well, particularly in rural areas, to think about in terms of what they could be serving. Next slide. So the TRPC has done some analysis on land capacity in all the different areas of the county, including rural areas, each of the landlords, or not each of the, a couple of key places of interest, as well as within the rural area, as well as Grand Mound, to help understand what the opportunities are under current zoning. A couple of key points that when this data is out there, you're kind of expect to see that there's, first of all, the two alternatives they're significantly different in terms of the targets, as you would expect by 14% of the growth going to rural areas versus 5%. So it makes a really big difference in terms of the amount of housing at all those different income levels that you'd expect in rural areas. However, in both of those alternatives, what we're seeing so far is that there's a lack of capacity for meeting low income and moderate income housing targets within the rural areas. But that deficit or that shortage of capacity is a lot lower in the Sustainable Thurston or the proposed action alternative compared to the other one. Within the Grand Mound UGA, it's a much lower target because it just hasn't grown as much, and the methodology is really kind of think about what have been historic trends in terms of growth. So there has been very significant differences at all between the two alternatives in terms of what's allocated for Grand Mound. So in both of them, there is also a lack of capacity for that low income housing targets. There is actually, it technically shows a lack of capacity at the higher end as well at over 120, but that could easily be met with some of the moderate density zoning there. So that's not as much of a concern in terms of showing capacity as the lower impact, lower income unit needs. Next slide. So in terms of next steps and what we're doing and what we'll be bringing to you guys in the meetings to come, in rural Thurston County, as I've been saying, there's going to be a need, however things shake out, there's going to be some need to show needs, particularly at that 50 to 80% MFI. It says AMI. I'm using them interchangeably. MFI, it's the median family income level. And so I think here, to kind of build on some of the conversation that was happening earlier, the county could consider whether there are landlords that might be appropriate for types of multifamily housing, or maybe new mobile manufactured home communities that can serve that level. I think that's going to be a key thing to figure out. And for that shortage at the moderate income level, that 80 to 120%, here, like as I said before, our kind of preliminary look shows that some of those newer manufactured homes that are being placed out in rural areas are actually coming in at price points that are affordable there. So that's one, showing the evidence that those are actually being built and serving that market is kind of one way to kind of demonstrate that the capacity may be there already. So I think a little bit more analysis is needed, but that's something that we've looking into so far. And within Grand Mound, again, it's there we're going to there's gonna be targets for the extremely low income and permanent supportive housing, that's PSH. And there it's gonna require some rezones to allow for low-rise apartments. At least 20 to 30 units an acre, ideally more, which would be a change from the zoning out there right now. But in order to provide for the type of housing that would meet those needs and those targets, those would need to be explored. Next slide. Another key new requirement is making adequate provisions. And it's to accommodate housing needs at each income level. So one thing you can do is obviously change the zoning to show that you have capacity for it. But the law takes it farther than that. You can't just show that you have capacity for it if the stuff's not actually getting built. You need to go farther. So this requires that the county documents barriers to housing availability at each income level. So part of that is the land capacity analysis, but it's also documenting other types of barriers, such as funding for affordable housing production, infrastructure to support multifamily housing. You might be able to zone a place, but if it can't be served by sewers, then it obviously it's not feasible to build there, for example, right? Lack of incentives to encourage multifamily housing. So we were talking about things like the multifamily tax exemption that's available within UGAs, within cities. I think it's in UGAs as well now. But it's other types of incentives, or allowances to try to encourage and make it easier to build multifamily housing, and development regulations as well, looking at setbacks, looking at parking requirements, building heights, things that even if it's zoned for a certain level, if the development regulations aren't supportive of it, it makes it unfeasible. So it's a requirement for the county to identify these types of things, to document them, and then to document programs and actions needed to address those, and kind of work plan for doing that in the comp plan. They don't have to be implemented with the comp plan, but they need to be documented. And they also there needs to be considerations for housing related to employment locations and the roles of ADUs in meeting some of these needs as well. Excellent.
A quick question.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about documenting barriers to housing, so I know this is supposed to be like a jurisdiction by jurisdiction assignment, but would it make sense, or could we document like the structural problems with our growth management system that put us in this position, like expecting the county to provide a certain level of affordable housing when we're essentially required to not provide municipal level services to these areas, which would be required to have like effective dense housing. Like this, like the way that we treat the OFM projections is like, well, this is what's gonna happen and we better accommodate it, like forgetting that growth management is to manage growth, not just accommodate the growth that like however it would fall on the, when you toss it out into the ether. Anyway, that is my little rant to say, I think in my mind, it makes sense to document the problems with our whole growth management framework leading to lack of asking the county to make all of this affordable housing available when it just screams like, why aren't the cities taking all of it? So.
Those conversations.
I know, but I think we might want to document it if that feels like it's in scope. So-
I think it is appropriate to document it, and the feedback we're getting from the Department of Commerce, at least for the 0 to 50% AMI and even 50 to 80% AMI, is that it can't really be accommodated out in rural areas. 50 to 80%, I think there's room for us to look. But we'll see what we've got. We don't have the kind of landmarks that a lot of other counties do. A lot of ours are lakeside or they're along the waters. I mean, Rochester, like that's pretty much our biggest landmark that isn't like a legacy lakefront community where you're not really gonna find affordable housing. So, but we're gonna do our best.
Commissioner Bartlett.
Yeah, this just seems to go right back to what we were discussing earlier, in that I think that the way that we're going to get these kinds of communities is by being fairly inventive about shunting around populations, into like making sure that we're keeping the overall density, but the overall regional density, but, bringing those populations together into a fairly dense area where resources can be accommodated to them.
The cost of the land is the most difficult part about the trying to take those larger parcels and even cluster. But that's where if you can find a conservation partner with an affordable housing partner, like they're doing up in the San Juans, that might be a way to approach some of that. It's not gonna get at the number, I mean, you're talking like maybe a few dozen, not hundreds.
Yeah, I struggle with like doing gymnastics to do it in the county when we have a perfectly great solution in the cities and it's apartments or with municipal services.
I think that goes back to, you know, I whine about this a lot. If we can somehow convince the cities to start incorporating the UGAs and adding urban services, so that way you can up density, that is the easiest lift here. Is getting the cities on board to actually start increasing densities in the UGAs by incorporating them.
We do have people who want to live in rural areas because that's where their communities are, that's where their families are, that's where their jobs are. So I just want to make sure that that is also said, that, you know, having choice, as was pointed out by Miriam, is important for folks that might want to have their kids move back or have their elders move back, you know.
Or the dignity that Anna brought up in terms of flexibility of housing.
I mean, it's a simple metabolic problem, like you can't like it's inherently more expensive to provide service or to build all the infrastructure necessary.
Oh, yeah, at those densities, but there are, you know, there could be a way to make some of our housing types that are allowed out in the county more affordable.
How do we establish more landmarks?
You can't.
So, I'm kind of piggybacking on what Derek said. I think document barriers to housing, number one, is growth management act. Number two is the county commissioners and the cities and their memorandum of understanding. Because basically what the county commissioners have done is said, you know what, cities, you do whatever you want to do and we accept it. And so, you know, like I use the example of transfer of development rights. There is development rights in Thurston County that can be transferred, but no city has set up a usable program to take those development rights and turn them into actual units. And I participated in a focus group working on this. There was, you know, lots of ideas thrown about. And in the end, the cities just went with. And I mean, I know it's different now, but I know when I first started this, the biggest barrier to Thurston County's transfer of development rights was that if you bought land in the city, you couldn't build out to what it was zoned, much less add development rights, add more housing to it. And I think the county just, I mean, again, this is the barrier, the county just sitting back and saying, you know what, cities, do what you want to do is a big problem. And they say, oh, we're working together. Well, if I'm telling somebody what I'm going to do and say, you know what, you deal with the consequences, we're not working together. And I mean, I've said it before. I mean, the two of you remember Tumwater.
Yeah.
We had something that came up and it was for our joint plan. And it was a whole 2 pages of code from Tumwater that Thurston County was just going to adopt by
Wholesale.
yeah. And it was, and of course, the big one that caught my eye was agriculture. And I said, you can't tell people in the urban growth area who, as we've found here, may never live in the city, that they have to live by the city's rules. But what happens when they go talk to the city council? I can tell you exactly what happens. The city council
on an 8-0 vote by the Thurston County Planning Commission said, oh, well, that was just one planning commissioner that didn't like that. That was said on the record in a city council meeting. And then they turned it to, you know, well, that, when I said, no, this is what this says. This says that you're going to put these restrictions on people who live in the county without giving them a voice or a vote. They said, well, it doesn't say that. It just says we can. I mean, everybody that's in this room probably knows by now that when government says they can do something, it means eventually they will. You know, so.
Except for annexing Tanglewood.
Except for annexing.
Treaty policies, not even that's required.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess to Eric's point, talking about this and looking at this specific piece, I think the city's annexing UGAs puts us in an even worse spot as a county. Because all of our, every place that we have that we can put medium to high density and put these affordable units in.
Is UGA.
If it goes to UGA, guess what? It's not part of the, or if it goes to the city and it's no longer counted as part of the county, then we lose all that ability to bring housing prices down in the county.
There's definitely been discussion, because there's no outline for how this is gonna be monitored, like who gets credit for what housing units are being built where. So I don't know if Kevin has any insights, but yeah, some of it has been brought up, like for the UGAs.
Commissioner Passenger and Commissioner Bartley.
So I also agree with Chair Day that documenting the examples of barriers would be important. I actually think the biggest barrier is outside investment capital. There have been a lot of arguments about whether you can do anything to limit that. There have been a lot of jurisdictions, cities, counties, and states that have been making laws that limit or create rules around outside investors, out of country investors, out of community investors. We all know the stories about people who have loans who are ready to buy a house and they get swooped out from under by an all cash offer. And it happens all of the time. And so that's certainly an example of a barrier to homeownership and housing. Just being able to get loans and access to loans needs to be listed. But also, I'm a little concerned about the way this sort of spreadsheet here, housing types and income levels served. I know it doesn't exactly say this, but I'm worried that we're just recasting this whole directive that we have to address historical inequities, racially speaking, as well as we need to plan for housing at all income levels, to just being a simple answer of, let's make sure we plan for low-rise multifamily. Let's make sure we plan for moderate density, low density. I mean, first off, all of these, even according to this, don't have anything except for ADUs, maybe in the 50 to 80% range. Nothing else in here is even below 80%. Do you know if someone makes minimum wage here, what percentage of the median they're at?
Full-time?
Yeah.
Minimum wage is what, 17 something?
Yeah, 2,080 hours. It's like not even half. It's like 40% of the MFI or AMI. It just
40% or 40.9%.
So another thing I think that may be relevant to the conversation of the cities versus the county is affordable housing incentives. Many of the cities have been very foolish, in my opinion, in using everything that could be an incentive for affordable housing, whether it's reduced setbacks, increased heights, capabilities, greater volume, zoning changes, number of units per acre, and other things. All these things, including even multifamily tax exemptions. And 8 years, 12 years, there are different models in different communities. Tacoma has the more interesting one on that one. but we've been giving away 8-year tax exemptions to market rate development, high-end condos, basically, high-end apartment buildings, and when that happens, there's gonna be next to no incentives to encourage housing at 30% level, the 50% level, the 80% level. I know that in the last few meetings, we've had a representative from Habitat for Humanity here. I know he said he shared documents with staff. I wonder whether the consultants have seen any of these, some of those related to ways to make housing more affordable through a variety of zoning and other things the county does have under their purview. Has Burke seen any of those? Do you have any input on how to integrate some of those ideas into this?
I haven't seen documents. Anna, Anna met with Aiden.
It's the affordable housing overlay zoning. I have not shared it with Burke. I admittedly put LRA as my priority. However, it has been on my list to share with him following this work session.
I know Yelm just started a Habitat community,
Yes.
and that's one of the first in the county.
And I had a follow-up conversation with him and he plans on sharing some draft policy ideas in addition to the documentation he's already provided. And was brainstorming with him as it pertains to Grand Mound, what some of that might look like, because it will be a little bit different than probably what would be proposed for the North County cities. But yeah, we were chatting about Yelm and whether it can be, something like that could be done. I mean,
Thank you for that, and that's great. And my biggest point I want to make in all of this is that I don't accept the idea that apartments is the solution to affordable housing. Because while apartments, we may get more people housed less expensively, it is the worst financial situation for many people's lifetime wealth accumulation. And it is, if we were to get everyone to be houseless because we built so many apartments, but we have 80% of everyone in the county being renters, we have not necessarily accomplished a great thing. And so I just really hope that we take that into consideration.
so affordable housing incentive programs as well as homeownership incentive programs.
Exactly.
Commissioner Bartlett, Commissioner Butler.
Yeah, on that note, myself, like, I'm very much in the like unmentionable income bracket on this, in terms of, I've been pretty much at minimum wage from my entire time being here. And almost every housing situation that I've been in has been in a single family house that is owned, that is lived in by a half dozen people. That is actually from my experience, that's like the old norm for Olympia, and it doesn't exist very much anymore because of the way the housing prices have been changing. Most of those kinds of rentals are no longer available through a combination of landlord choice and the outside investors largely scooping those houses up. That's something that I would be interested in seeing how we can encourage the reintroduction of, because it doesn't require us to build new housing. It just requires us to reuse the housing that we already have. And so that's something that's a fairly immediate solution. Although I do very much agree that it's just putting people in people having to rent forever in a situation where you do not contribute towards ownership or even towards getting credit towards being able to get a mortgage is not a long-term solution, but yeah. So I think I agree that looking at just changing housing types is overly restrictive in looking at this.
This is more about how we present this data. A lot of what we're displaying is spectrums of color showing the entire economic spectrum. And I think we lose sight of our lower quintiles or quartiles, however we're doing this, when we present the data that way. I think looking at a county map and seeing where is affordable housing for, or what percentage of available housing meets the income needs for the bottom quartile or the second quartile. And when you can compare those things, we're talking about housing at every level. I feel like sometimes we're like, well, there's needs at every level. And that is true. but we also need to be making sure that we're addressing where the highest need is, and it feels like the middle to up, the top two quartiles are much easier to address, and so we elaborate much more on those. And we sort of say, ADUs and subsidies will handle the bottom two quartiles, but we're not addressing the level of need at where the highest need is in a lot of these things. So I think if we can, when we present that information, if it's possible to split it either quartile or quintile, so you can see very low income, middle income, like show physically, and also I would caution against shading large areas in color. Just because those are sometimes very low population density areas and can lead to the perception that there is large swaths of affordability, but if that land can feasibly, with zone only fit, a couple hundred homes, it's pointless, yes. I'm very tired of seeing how affordable the Capitol Forest is. No one's living there.
There might be people
Well,
living
no,
there.
no one is in a, you know what I mean?
As a former Z dormer, there are people living.
But you see what I'm saying, like it can be deceptive.
Yeah.
Because it's not representative of a density at all or capacity in those when we're just shading large chunks. And I know a lot of that is census tracts and that's where you're getting ACS data, but there is ways to get more granular data than that.
This goes right into, and I wanna get back into the presentation, so I'm gonna tie this into the conversation, but this goes right back into effective housing segregation, and where we are and aren't seeing that. We have some areas on here that it looks like if we're looking at urban density, it looks like we have relatively high quotient of BIPOC folks, relatively high quotient of Hispanic and Latino folks in these urban areas. It looks like the rest of the area is really low diversity, which is true, but that other area of low diversity is also extremely not populated. So I think by looking at more high density populations and combining this with affordable housing, we can actually get a little bit more granular information. I actually suspect, given what we just saw, that there's a different narrative around people of color in Thurston County than there is in a lot of other areas. The reason that we have higher home ownership than average is probably related to that, which is probably Fort Lewis.
Really quickly too. It wasn't just BIPOC and Latinx folks who were higher homeownership. Only white were higher homeownership too. And I think part of that is the average age of this county. We're comparing ourselves to the entire state, right? Thurston County is older than than other areas of the county, of the state. So that will flavor homeownership, because as you get older, homeownership tends to go higher. So just putting that out there.
I mean, just one more real quick. When we're talking about barriers to housing availability. And this is outside of our purview, but not the commissioners. The costs, because we always look at cost, but what about the cost of permitting?
We've heard we've been talking to builders, realtors, whatnot. Permitting definitely comes up. And very specifically, the cost of reasonable use exceptions in the critical areas ordinance. That if you want to put a drain field in, or even if it's like a short-term disturbance, that won't be a long-term disturbance. You could impact a buffer by a few square feet and it will trigger a reasonable use exception. And so that one is a very specific one that we have heard if there's any kind of
$6 grand to see a hearing examiner.
flexibility, not that a permit wouldn't be required, but whether it should be at that level, because you're talking about $6,000 to $10,000 additional in fees and about a year wait to even get before the hearings examiner. And so it is helpful to get those really specific things. So yes, permits have come up. Permit costs.
Question related to that. 6 years ago, Olympia City Council member made a big stir by saying their analysis in the city of Olympia is for a new home, the minimum starting of permitting fees is $30,000. And since then, everyone I've talked to said that number's only gone up, and I just heard for here, even in the county, that it could be as high as 50,000 for a single family home. Is that accurate? Is that the cost of all the fees, impact fees and other permitting fees that are for a single new family home in the county?
I think that is good information to find out. I don't have that off the top of my head, but we can get that.
We'll get back to last few slides and then down at the end. So we are taking all of your comments and these are all related to affordable housing, but also making new policies. So we are into the policy section. So the state now requires, and what Kevin mentioned, that we need to address racially disparate impacts in the analysis and also in the policy language. So that's something that you will be looking at as well. So right now, these are the steps, and we have done the analysis part, and now we are evaluating the policies. And then we'll be bringing those policies in front of you. And then the policies will be revised as needed. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to give you some examples. So we are not going through the policies tonight, and just still, so what might be coming up, what will be coming up. So it's like when we look at the policies and regulations, we look at whether it's causing more displacement or if it's causing more exclusion. Identify, like you just mentioned, like permitting process, that's a barrier. So those are the type of things, it's like what could be, what are the barriers that we need to address in the policy language as well as in the development regulations. Some of the barriers could be not having zoning, not having infrastructure available, but then housing is needed, and the disinvestment, so that could be other ones. One of the example policies that I just added here is like ensure the county regulations, policies and permit processes do not lead to displacement and marginalized populations. So that's a policy, it's a broader language, but then we need to look into the development regulations. It's like, how does that play into exact implementation? But I also wanted to show you a couple of examples of what you will be looking at pretty soon. We looked at some of your existing policy languages, and this one is talking about when possible, the county should provide assistance in obtaining funding and or technical assistance for the expansion or establishment of low cost affordable housing for low, moderate and fixed income individuals and families. So the evaluation criteria that we have from the guidelines is that we could see whether it directly supports, or approaching means like it is close, but you could enhance that. And then challenges like, okay, it's actually not, it's working against it. So this is a policy that we recommend that you also add moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income households into this policy. But again, this is a discussion whether that's something that county will eventually have as part of the land capacity. So a lot of elements to work within this framework. The next policy is talking about encourage housing opportunities for all citizens, regardless of race, religion, all of that. So this is an approaching, but again, from policy perspective, when you say citizens, it's instead of that, saying community members is more inclusive, because we heard from your community members that when you talk about citizens, some of the people are not willing to participate. So those are the examples that you will be seeing in our policy recommendation that will be coming up, and also going to the next steps is like you will, so we are right now working on the goals and policies and development regulations. We'll bring those to you for your review as well. And then then based on your input, we'll have draft goals and policies and draft housing element and climate element. You will have another workshop for that, and then draft EIS. So we have a time frame. We will be working throughout this year and then early next year to finalize everything. So that's about it. And we got a lot of inputs tonight.
I think we already
Thank
jumped
you
into
so much.
policies.
Us.
We don't have opinions on things.
Sorry, really quick, biodiversity. It looks like the a data set that is commonly used is Department of Fish and Wildlife's priority habitat species data. They don't call it biodiversity, but I can assure you that that is data that we use on a daily basis over in current planning and that we use for our voluntary stewardship program, shoreline master program, habitat conservation program. It is definitely baked into our system, and we'll make sure that FERC is using it as well in the EIS.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go for your time.
Go eat.
Sorry, for putting you so late.
No, that was great. Good discussion. Thank
I
you.
think she expected.
You prepared
I have
her.
been a planner for 25 years.
Thank you, Aneza.
Thank you.
All right, well, with that, I think we can move on if there's nothing else on item 7. We good? So other business, moving on to staff update.
We are almost fully staffed. We have one position open, and that's Miriam's backfill position for an education outreach coordinator. And I am so excited to announce we received 79 applications.
I referred 2 people to OICDU, so.
People want to be on our team because we give them so many professional development opportunities.
I thought her daughter was just gonna automatically get that job.
I'm also excited to report that the Board of County Commissioners approved a new leadership position in our group for a conservation program manager. Something that we haven't had for quite a while, and they will be leading both the working lands conservation efforts that we have underway, as well as the habitat conservation program. So there'll be a team of folks working on it, but having someone at the helm whose primary role is securing conservation land will be awesome.
Will conservation futures get wrapped into that? That team?
But Andy does such a good job.
Did Andy want that job?
Don't worry, I definitely keep dangling it in front of him. It could be. He, right now, Andy DeFobis, who a lot of you know, he divides his time between Habitat Conservation Program and Shoreline Master Program. Those are 2 very big programs to manage. So it's to be seen whether it's Shoreline Master Program and the new Water Resources Advisory Board that kind of shifts away from his job duties, or whether it's more the land conservation side. Yeah, a lot of work to be done. Very excited to have more people to help us.
Where's ecology at on the SMP?
They're gonna be scheduling a public hearing. I don't know date announced yet. They were asking if we would be willing to host it. We'd be like, back to the future. So
Just say yes.
more to come, but we will be sure to invite, I mean, everyone's gonna get notified, and I know that you're on, or that has been notified previously for the SMP.
I have one, just real quick one related to the calendars. You will, we are shuffling projects constantly. So the project you see next week, or in 2 weeks, will potentially be different than what you're seeing. So don't tie yourself to any of the upcoming projects. They are constantly shuffling and.
The docket projects.
Docket
Trying to
projects.
balance them.
Violence. There was some twang in that, I'm just saying.
Central New York twang.
Are we getting bumped?
It's shifting a little bit. We're working closely with the city of Lacey to coordinate just overall because of the coordination requirements, and we want to make sure we're on the same page. And so we're waiting for planning commission coordination.
You'll be happy to hear that Lacey does not want to do a joint planning commission meeting because they're so hard to schedule.
Just for the Martin Way rezone?
Yeah.
Oh,
We don't have a precedent for a rezone that falls outside of joint plan. So we were gonna bring it forward to this planning commission first and thought it might be better to have Lacey Planning Commission take a look at it and provide a recommendation to this planning commission before moving it forward, rather than having a joint meeting and trying to coordinate the whole thing.
Alright.
Sometimes leaves us with the lack of a quorum on the other side of that.
Yeah, I know. Just avoid that whole thing. We want Tasha to stay with us.
Actually, it was a county hearings examiner that last looked at this particular issue, so having just the county deal with this one is probably not the same problem.
It's pretty clear though, if it's a rezone and frankly, without, well. There isn't clear rezone criteria set forth in the Lacey joint plan. And I think it's helpful to get Lacey's thoughts on the Martin Way corridor. Especially the use of the mixed high density corridor zoning that they've established. So,
Or they could annex it.
or they could annex it. It's,
Stonewall them until they
I wanna
annex
make
it.
sure that we're coming to you with as much information as we have, rather than all of these questions. Because I can see the first question being, what does Lacey think about the mixed high density corridor zoning? Like, we didn't ask them, so it won't delay it by much. Just might be a month to get it on their calendars.
That sounds like it makes sense. Okay.
Spirit of collaboration.
All right, any other staff updates before we move on to calendaring? Okay, well, thank you very much. So speak of the Martin Way land use and rezone, and it shall appear on July 10th, maybe, but maybe not. So, no, anyways, long way of saying we have two meetings coming up. We have the 10th and the 17th. Are there any of us that know we will not be able to attend those? Okay. You're not gonna sneak off to Portland or something?
Maybe. I've yet to miss a meeting since. being appointed, so.
Okay, well, it sounds like we should have a quorum for those. All right, moving on to good of the order. Does anybody have anything for the good of the order?
Yeah, I want to jump on what Commissioner Pester said about the schedule at the beginning of the meeting. And I know tonight's kind of special because we had somebody come in from out of town.
Mhm.
We didn't want, you don't want to send her home. But typically, in the entire time, we've tried to schedule meetings to only last 2.5 hours. And that's what, it's kind of why they start at 6:30, because we used to not start till 10 or till 7. And the 2.5 hour meeting that runs a little long takes you till 10. And so,
I do wanna just note really appreciatively that we are like exactly on the part of the schedule we're supposed to be somehow after all of our digressions, but.
We got lucky.
In total, we're where we're supposed to be. If we actually map the.
Yeah.
Those. Shrinking and enlarging there.
Someone over, someone under.
And as we try to, we can try to, we can write an agenda that says 2.5 hours and it will potentially balloon. We also have a hard time estimating how long the planning commission is gonna wanna sit with topics. Some things that we think are gonna take 1.5 hours, it's like, nope, it's 20 minutes. And other things,
Yeah, meetings are like water. They'll usually like expand to fit the time allotted for this. And so,
It is worth noting, the next meeting after that, which I think is the 7th, I will be driving my mother who's visiting down to the Portland airport, so I won't be able to attend. But unless I work some magic there, but
That's August?
August 7th, yeah, she's visiting from the end of July until the early August, flying over from Pennsylvania.
all right. Anything else for the good of the order? I think that is duly noted.
Happy Pride.
Yeah, Cap City Pride's this weekend too. 28th. Or 29th. Something like that. Tired.
All right, anything else for the good of the order? Having no other business, this meeting is adjourned.